The Russian loan of 15 billion, 3 of which we gave on the eve of Yanukovych's flight, was an attempt to reduce Ukraine's dependence on the West, naturally by increasing dependence on Russia. After the introduction of troops, Western funding for Ukraine would automatically stop. This means that Russia should have started providing it. With the simultaneous introduction of sanctions against us and the overlapping of financial reserves, Russia turned out to be incapable of doing this already in the second, maximum in the third month. The reaction of Ukrainians who do not receive pensions, wages, fueled by the habit of changing the government is obvious. Plus, in another 1.5 to 2 months, rallies of pensioners and state employees, who would have had delays in payments, would also be here. The Russian budget, even with a reserve fund, is unable to provide for both Russia and Ukraine at the same time in conditions of external isolation. Third, the current Western sanctions against Russia are not the maximum. After all, this is such a form of war through a modern siege. When it comes to individual financial or personal measures, many people forget that there are more non-obvious, but no less problematic things. Here's a simple example for you. All production in modern Russia is built either on old Soviet machine tools, which are not capable of producing competitive products, or on new machines purchased in the West. The problem is that all these machines have an integral part of the so-called CNC, numerical control. To ensure the operation of the machines online via the internet, satellite or cables, they are connected to a foreign manufacturer, which ensures their operation and maintenance. The introduction of sanctions in these areas would stop the entire sector of real production. A similar situation permeates almost all strategic sectors of our lives. The question of why this situation happened, who is to blame, has a long history of answers and does not affect the current situation. Now the state, with varying degrees of effectiveness, is trying to somehow correct the situation. But optimism is still far away. Fourth. Andrei, you yourself are Ukrainian. My interlocutor is distracted from the sheet. You are well aware of the mentality of the population of Ukraine. You cannot have any illusions about the current pro-Russian nature of the eastern regions or their hyperactivity. Against the background of the movements of a certain number of activists, the majority simply waited and were not ready to interfere in any particular way. The example of Odessa should be obvious to you. And this despite the fact that the entire nationalist, pro-Western, anti-Russian segment of Ukrainian society had already been mobilized, extremely active, and against the background of the anti-Russian activities of the media and the oligarchs, significantly influenced the rest. The maximum that we could achieve is a full-fledged civil war, but not only in the Donbass, but throughout Ukraine, with the support of one of the parties. But it's not even Vietnam or Afghanistan. Everything here is much more tragic and problematic. First of all, for us, we really could have reached Kiev with an army. A very large army. Not because it would have to fight a lot, but because in every major city and district they would have to leave their commandant's offices, strongholds and police units with the tasks of anti-sabotage against the nationalists and radicals who had trained on the Maidan. And this is a classic annexation. Fifth, the mood of our elite and national interests. In recent history, we have never wanted new territorial expansions. And why? Crimea was absolutely forced. At the level of sensations, he has always been Russian. Plus, there was a whole set of rational calculations and prerequisites, hereinafter a series of well-known arguments about the reasons for the annexation of Crimea. Why do we need new territories? We are already the largest country in the world. Get even bigger? First of all, this dictates new problems and responsibilities, and only then new opportunities. Instead, we need economic expansion that can bring real integration. Along with it cultural and others. In this sense, we do not need Ukraine as part of Russia. What does this fundamentally change, except for the need for the Moscow Center to think about feeding Ukraine? There is no geopolitics here. We need Ukraine as part of the customs union and a well-integrated Eurasian space. The example of the European Union is indicative in this sense. Global political expansion is possible only in the presence of a passionate super idea, which is not present now. Super ideas are generally not invented strained. Time gives birth to them through its profits. Now look further. My interlocutor walks over to a large vintage Marty's Provence cabinet, sorts through something, and pulls out a thick leather folder with a silver lock, which is actually a large document box. Browse. I open the folder. Its content is devoted to Ukraine. More precisely, just what we are talking about. The prospects for actual annexation. Several of the top papers have a specific character and corresponding vultures. After the overview document on Russian property in Ukraine, there is a large block of analysis of long-term social studies. One part of sociology is devoted to Russia, the other to Ukraine. The accompanying note explains the three different structures through which sociology has been conducted. Authoritatively, I'm looking at several graphs of population preferences and expectations. Ukraine. Breakdown by regions, strategically important, are highlighted with brief characteristics. Further, the sentiments on the possible entry of Russian troops, readiness for resistance, the degree of activity-passivity. Samples on the activity of radicals. Reaction to Yanukovych and Maidan leaders. A cut of activity by national, social and age strata, readiness for partisan struggle. Analysis of forms and methods of resistance. Researches on Novorossiysk regions are allocated. I leaf through, read the Russian segment. Attitude of the population to the Ukrainian theme, awareness of it. Perception of a possible entry of troops. Reaction to possible losses. Critical loss figures for a sharp change in public opinion and the ratio with the expected ones. One of the appendices is called, What Will Happen When the Coffins Go to Russia? Analysis of the rating of power in such a development of the situation. Yes, you understand what's the matter, my interlocutor says, sitting heavily in a luxurious armchair that looks more like a throne. We all want to be voluntarists and postmodernists. It's very fascinating, to do as you want, and let the world adapt to you. It's great and ambitious. It's just that the world doesn't seem to fit in very well. A vivid example is your gherkin. He's not mine. Rather yours. Okay. Our gherkin. He did what? He climbed where he was not ordered, climbed at the wrong time. But we even adjusted for a while. It's just that everyone else didn't fit in, because it turned out that we are, of course, the largest country in the world. However, this is not enough. Let's say Canada is in second place after us in size, and Brazil is in fifth. But does anyone in the world listen to Brazil? No. Much more is needed for this. We are just going in this direction, overcoming huge external and, most importantly, internal resistance. And almost the whole world turned against us. How is everyone? What about China, India? Well, stop it. We don't use slogans on talk shows. The whole world is the whole world, not its working hands. And when Gherkin rushed to your Slavyansk, what was he saying? That Ukraine is weak, there is no army, and Russian speakers support it everywhere. Like, there are enough internal prerequisites and conditions. That a few determined people from Russia will become the backbone of the entire southeast, which will crush the Kiev junta. And what? Bummer. The army suddenly turned up for no reason, and a significant part of the Russian-speaking eastern regions came under the arms of Kiev. And then Gherkin lamented to Russia, save the good people. The interlocutor grins and puffs on his pipe. Who did you declare yourself to be? Militia? Did you come there under the cries of sufficient internal resources? Consolidate them. Skillfully build in a potential. You've been given a chance. But in a difficult situation, where a talented commander could have a whole set of non-standard exits and decisions, this one was left with whining and retreat. Original steps. Here is his environment, and he himself began to compare himself with Kutuzov. Like, Kutuzov also surrendered Moscow. Yes. Past. But Kutuzov is great not because he surrendered Moscow, but because he then defeated Napoleon. After all, when he fled from Slavyansk, we gave him time to fix something. But then they realized that he was going to run even further. Plus, the militia is, after all, such a thing that always consists of locals. That's why it's a militia. But this one of yours began to demand the intervention of all of Russia. What does Russia have to do with it, since you are the leader of the local militia? Who entrusted you to decide for Russia? After all, he simply jumped closer to Russia when he failed, and declared this a great military trick. Why didn't you jump back to Kharkov, for example? And where should Russia bounce if it fails in Ukraine? Behind us are people, residents of the country, who are hardly ready to accept all the consequences of this interference. My counterpart nervously tosses the pipe into a transparent ceramic ashtray. I don't agree with everything that's been said, but I'm still listening. You read on. I'm leafing through. There are inquiries about the Ukrainian media, who owns what, who covers what and how. Analysis of the influence of the media on public opinion. Following is a review of the international situation, calculations and schemes of allied relations, the alignment of anti-Russian forces, and the prospects for internal mobilization of pro-Russian ones. Damn, are the prospects really so weak? Further, the calculations of financiers and economists on the reaction of the economy to the introduction of troops. Do you know who objected the most to the input? The interlocutor again sits down in his chic chair. Military. And they had arguments for this. I listened to the gist of these arguments. It's hard. The price of security. Crimea. And where were you in March, when we took the regional state administration? Discommanded here with the guards. The stocky woman looked at me piercingly, not paying attention to the formidable PM. In the cabin of the general elevator going to the 11th floor of the Donetsk regional administration, Kleshnya with the butt of the oar, pressed to the collarbone covered with flora, tried to isolate her from me, saying, "Woman, drive in silence." I stopped him and replied, "Forgive me if you cause any inconvenience." In March? In Crimea. Fees to the Crimea were hasty. And here is the queue for passport control at the Simferopol airport. Passports are checked by Ukrainian border guards. Chevrons with tridents and blue and yellow flags will be changed later. The airport looked quite ordinary. The passport regime was checked in a general manner. A possible question was spinning in my head: the purpose of the visit? Answer: the annexation of Crimea to Russia was not good enough. But the question was not asked. It will be later, when in the second half of April we will leave to meet important shiny officials wrapped in St. George ribbons, like holiday gift boxes, and near-budget hucksters who have smelled prey. The airport will change. Passport control will disappear, and the duty-free store, which is closed due to the lack of a customs zone, will sell us 2 bottles of whiskey at half price, a soft Macallan and a noble Glenlivet. The Dutic girls will lend us some, lo and behold, glass ones. And not some plastic cups there, and farewell to the Russian Crimea will become exquisite. In the meantime, the Crimea was not ours. There was very little time to make it so. The spring of 2014 was cold. The difference with Moscow is only in the purity of the air. Trying to dress lighter on the trip south proved a futile idea, and some members of our group were forced to buy things on the spot. Fortunately, the crisis and subsequent events led to emergency sales in Crimean stores, which sharply reduced prices. As a result, on the way back I was carrying a SLR camera bought at Comfrey for half the price. Similar cameras were in the hand luggage of my comrades. Somewhere in the city, our contact was waiting for us, a former intelligence officer, and now a businessman associated with representatives of the new Crimean authorities, named Victor. Victor turned out to be a peculiar person. Looking furtively at the building of the Crimean Council of Ministers, he suggested that we move in somewhere, for example, in rented apartments, and then we'll see. Vitya, where to look? On the spot, you must clarify the task. The task. GGGHH. Well, in general, the special group after completing the task before the flight from the Crimea, the second half of April 2014. Here Victor cleared his throat. He thought about it and, gesticulating furiously, almost blurted out, as far as it is possible for a person with such unstable diction, apparently surprised at his swing, "You must take control of the SBU." Which SBU? Well, the Crimean SBU, everything except Sevastopol. There, the locals manage somehow. When, how, and how much time do we have? Well, come tomorrow with our force cover. But how? XXX. Well, start, or something, to communicate with people. Fabulous. We begin, so, KHHHH, to communicate with people. Main Directorate of the Security Service in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Simferopol, Franco Boulevard, 13. I am the leader of my group. We obey Vladimir Yurovich Antiyufeev. The second subgroup deals with border guards, the very ones who forgot to ask about the purpose of our visit. Now they recognize her. The main workplace we have chosen is the former main department of our own security of the SBU. The choice of location is not accidental. It is prayed by SBU employees, and the location allows you to comfortably control the entire building. We were headquarters. Sometimes one of us traveled outside, sometimes people were brought to the place to work centrally. I managed to switch only by running out for lunch and dinner to a small cafe located across the road, directly opposite the entrance to glave, with the tempting name 50 kinds of dumplings. View of the building of the Crimean headquarters of the SBU, at the entrance to the restaurant, in which during the Crimean spring many guests from the mainland ate. Dumplings, as well as other dishes, were chic. Gradually, after us, all the guests arriving on our subject began to run there, because of which there was sometimes no room in a small hall. And where do you make dumplings, dear? Is it by yourself? That know ye. We are transporting from near Kirovograd. It tastes better from there. Strange. Further routine. Mode, work with personnel, educational conversations, the formation of new personal files, trips to all district divisions and special facilities. We are creating the Security Service of the Republic of Crimea. On March 10, 2014, the SBK, Security Service of the Republic of Crimea, was officially proclaimed. On this day, with the participation of employees with whom we managed to work, we are organizing an officer meeting that supports the actions of the new leadership of Crimea in the confrontation with Kiev and the protection of pro-Russian values. Leading members of the Crimean Secret Service are making an open appeal to their former colleagues in Kiev with reproaches for supporting the illegal government and calls to change their minds. From defense, we quickly move on to the offensive. Hello? Attitude to the events in Kiev? Are you ready to work in the security of Crimea? Tell us about yourself, your service. Most often, in response, painful arguments that during the non-stop show to change the Ukrainian government, SBU officers got used to regularly kissing the ring to the new leadership, if only the leadership was ready to take this oath. But the option of Transnistria does not suit them categorically. Serve Crimea as a breakaway part of Ukraine, no, serve Russia, with pleasure. Further bargaining on the topic of maintaining seniority, benefits, titles, and awards. Formally, the head of the Crimean SBU is the former head of the Sevastopol department of the SBU Petr Zima. Realistically, we are. My first task is to figure out what to do next. Invented. It is necessary that the SBU employees confirm in writing their desire to serve further in the new conditions. So far, the future is only being built, and the statement should be extremely general, without direct formulations, as a compromise. I am developing it. Surname, name and patronymic, realizing my responsibility to the people as the bearer of sovereignty and the only source of state power, declare that I am ready to accept the will of the people, participate in ensuring peace and security of the people of the Republic of Crimea and protect the Republic of Crimea from external and internal security threats. In this regard, I ask you to accept me for work, military service, in the Security Service of the Republic of Crimea. Further. What to do with the Crimean Alpha? Unlike other regional departments of Alpha SBU, the Crimean subdivision was a department that was part of the staff of the central office of the SBU and, in addition to Crimea, was responsible for several other regions of Ukraine. I work with Alpha. The fighters have declared neutrality, they are sitting at their base, waiting. What are they waiting for? The same as everyone else. It is not known what, but at least some clarity. Plus the outdoor base. The story is about the same, multiplied by the unspoken nature of the personnel. The situation was reversed after a general meeting and targeted conversations with the militants. As a result, out of 186 well-trained fighters, 160 came under the jurisdiction of the new Crimea. Russia was discussed only in the plan so far. We promise Russia. Bluffing. Oh my Crimean friends. Am I bluffing? No, of course. We definitely did not know about any Russia yet. But they promised. Bluff and bluff. There are no guarantees. A month and a half later, Strelkov bluffs in Slavyansk. Although his bluff will be of a completely different order, I have 3 bosses. President, Director of the SVR and FSB. Have you seen polite people in Crimea on TV? So that's us. In general, it was not our bluff at all. Strelkov and Crimea. When a member of our group asked a former high-ranking colleague of Strelkov whether it was true that Strelkov served in the FSB, he bitterly nodded, but, justifying himself, added, "Well, we are his." The word is applicable as a euphemism, fired. Later Oleg Boriza will remind me that we met this strange little man earlier. Arriving in Transnistria in 2007 under covered documents, Strelkov and a colleague met with me. Oleg and the then first Deputy Minister of Security of Transnistria Valery Yunvich at a safe house near the Tiraspol railway station. The arrivals collected information about Ukrainian nationalists who fought in Chechnya on the side of the bandits. Since many UNAUNSO members managed to fight on our side in the 92nd year, the topic was relevant. Strelkov in the office. Crimea, the events of the Crimean Spring. In a small naphthalene apartment on the second floor of the Soviet Khrushchev, two guests were waiting for us. One, shorter in stature, spoke little and, receiving answers to the questions asked, carefully stenographed them in a notebook. The second, taller, who later turned out to be Strelkov, spoke at length and mysteriously. Having demonstrated knowledge of the geography of Pridnestrovye, the guest carried a wild blizzard about the political and military situation, which we attributed to the Moscow factor of the distant guest. I didn't get along with him right away. They called me on my mobile. As it turned out later, while I was talking on the phone in the corridor, Gherkin asked Oleg what position I held. My friend, having said that I am in charge of my own security of the MGB of Pridnestrovye, did not specify that in parallel I am in charge of the entire block of directions in the fight against crime, corruption, and terrorism that I created. Therefore, in response, from Igor Gherkin, he heard that he didn't like me anyway, and belonging to the Security Council makes me an obvious bastard. So it didn't work out right away. But that's okay, because the Crimean experience was even sadder. It so happened that when Strelkov carried out a senseless and, according to his own participants, storming the cartographic part and, quite expectedly, received 2 corpses and 2 wounded in the N-59, this was the last straw that overflowed the cup of patience. And if the video, Crimean Defense Minister Kuznetsov and stolen flash drives, circulating on the internet reflects only the visible part of Strelkov's chaotic activity in Crimea, then the assault on cartographers was a real problem. He turned the peaceful process of the unification of Crimea and Russia into a bloody story. Our group was involved in the investigation of the situation. Moreover, all interested parties unanimously asserted that the Self-Defense Battalion, subordinate to the Ministry of Defense of Crimea, actually got out of control, turned into a flying bandit squad, doing what it wants to the best of its understanding of the situation. The battalion was led by Strelkov. It was during this period that meetings were held, at which, in particular, his former colleague gave a corresponding description. Only much later did I learn that a comrade was dismissed from the service after an unsuccessful psychologist's course, which ended in a brawl and diagnosing clear signs of schizophrenia, confirmed by the corresponding hereditary diagnosis of 3 children from 2 marriages. At first, this was attributed to Chechnya, and for a long time they kept the character at their disposal. Then, having figured it out, they offered to quit on their own. Further, Alexander Borodai, on the second attempt, will arrange him for Konstantin Malofeev, from where, out of old friendship, he will be dragged to the Crimea. But I'll find out later, and then it was just a strange type out of place. And here is the evening meeting with the prosecutor of Crimea, Natalia Poklonskaya, since she opened a criminal case into the deaths of the cartographers. A short discussion in the luxurious office of the Crimean prosecutor's office. Natalia is sympathetic. The stubborn character of a cute girl. She gives her investigator, whom she will later present for appointment as the prosecutor of one of the districts. Behind our backs, our local black-mouthed friends immediately started talking about the fact that this tall handsome man was her lover, which, however, was unlikely for a number of points. However, Oksonov and Sheremet and a number of other people were recorded as lovers to her, such gossip nature. Even if we assume that this was the case, then she acted nobly by sending her beloved to storm the gangster, as it seemed then, group. Because while the meeting was going on, the command came to disarm the Strelkov unit immediately. Vladimir Antyufeev volunteered for the talks. The handsome, important tall old man evoked awe, and the general's position and the constant mention of his important official status made him the messenger of some high forces, which was impossible to brush aside. The involvement of other self-defense units, such as Mikhail Sheremet, would only lead to mutual showdowns with a high probability of armed confrontation. The disarmament was successful. The gang group, upon closer examination, turned out to be a military unit with quite army discipline, maintained thanks to the efforts of General Kuznetsov. Her chaotic flight was provided exclusively by an exalted commander and several other activists, about whom experts would later say, a number of leaders of paramilitary structures are poorly trained professionally, do not understand the goals and objectives of urgent military construction, while being ambitious and euphoric. The rest thought that crazy teams always agreed with the top management. The people gathered were different, but among them there were quite decent, conscientious, patriotic fighters, sincerely rooting for the cause. I organized the participation of the Crimean Alpha in the removal of weapons and ensuring the protection of objects. The unit itself, after the final reconciliation of weapons, was disbanded. Its remnants will then form the backbone of the Slavic detachment of Strelkov. At a distance, many things are seen differently. At the same time, Anti-UF's actions were perceived by me as a feat, and precisely because of the fact that the criminal community was disarmed. I went up to Victor, who every day ran from us to Oxenfree, and began to demand that Anti-UF be marked for an event of the highest rank, to which Victor, after some hesitation, agreed with me. In this regard, I prepared an appropriate report with a detailed description of the feat of Hercules. True, that evening we decided to celebrate a successful event in one of the offices of the SBU. Having opened a jar of canned fish and cutting sausages, they drank. Victor left for a long time, and after his return I found out that he was leaving in order to be in time for the secretary to correct the document. He crossed out us, Anti-UF, and entered himself. The work went smoothly. The main body of the SBU personnel was changed by March 11th to 12th. Particular emphasis was placed on the operational services, the Department for the Protection of Statehood, Alpha, outdoor advertising and operational and technical units, as well as the territories. Thus, we not only eliminated the possible resistance of the SBU officers, attempts to destabilize the situation through a secret apparatus, but also forced them to massively carry out our tasks. The sluggish attempts of the central apparatus of the SBU to intervene in the situation were stopped. The emissaries from Kiev were simply escorted out of the peninsula. Even our new colleagues responded adequately to mailings of letters of happiness, with threats and persuasion. Dear colleagues, Diakumo for Spivchuchia. Resumo, how important it is for you there. If the rules of the special services work are not necessary, appoint people, from the streets, to the plantation, and everything that is assigned for long-term service, go to hell. We are generous to you. The people of SKRZ, however, like in Transcarpathia, like in Crimea, we swore an oath to protect them, which we didn't bend. And the people of Crimea Pragni won, peace, peace, evil that Povaga Yogo legal rights to language, culture, and security. We are relinquishing our oaths. Cream is our dim. Here they don't shoot, they don't roll people, they don't slander for the authorities, look, and representatives of law enforcement agencies don't respect anyone as guardians. Forward, for a rich rock, they warmly support the people. Unfortunately, there is nothing similar in other regions of Ukraine. Shanovan colleagues, Bazharmo you showcase and masculinity, more for the rich honest officers of the SBU, it's hard to test for honor and honor in the future. 60. In fact, by the time the referendum was held on March 16, ensuring his security fell on the competence of the SBU operatives. And now the professionals, trained to counteract threats to the statehood of Ukraine, themselves took up their promotion. This sight was mesmerizing. We redirected the course of the river and watched from the banks as the water washes away its mouth and source. In fact, what happened was both a verdict on the statehood of the then Ukraine, and the apotheosis of the moral decay of the entire apparatus, headed by its immune system, which is the special services. The referendum fired people up. The work of preparing for it was tedious and exhausting, but, as subsequent events showed, it was worth it. The locals, especially the Siloviki, kept asking until the very end whether Russia would recognize him. But we didn't know. Therefore, in good faith, they said, yes. In the evening, after the end of the referendum, it became clear that we could relax a bit and go out into the city. The city was buzzing. The rejoicing was truly universal. We walked through a crowd of shouting, flag-waving, triumphant people and understood that a big page had been turned in the history of Crimea. But we were not up to the pages. Fatigue dictated the desire to sit down and have a bite to eat. In the center of Simferopol, we went to the picturesque restaurant Dekanka. It was almost full, but there was a table. We ordered food. Guys, why aren't you happy? Are you against the referendum or against Russia? The voice was cheerfully aggressive. His owner contacted us. The rest of the tables were also waiting for explanations. No, for Russia, for the referendum, for everything good, cheers, cheers, cheers ah. To do work, SBU as a diagnosis. Where is it? To us? No, to the airport. Although no, it is better to go to the headquarters of the Azov. In a boarding school or a boathouse. Boat. The Azov Brigade in Mariupol was located in several places. The headquarters is in the building of a boarding school on the left bank of the city in the Ordzhonikidze district. The rest are in the premises of one of the Ilik boat stations in the Primorsky district. The young fighter of Alpha, officially called the Center for Special Operations for Combating Terrorism and Protecting Participants in Criminal Proceedings and Law Enforcement Officers of the Security Service of Ukraine, escorting the detainee, looked at the separatists stumbling on the move with some squeamish pity. An obvious hard worker with disheveled hair, a stunned smile and a yushka flowing from a broken nose did not give the impression of a villain. What will happen to him next, the employee already knew. But an order is an order. Alphonse should hurry up. There were only 4 of them at the administration. The seconded fighters worked according to their plan, and there were many tasks. Of course, the main power backbone was not personnel officers, but Azov with Holy Virgin Mary, but he also had enough work. After the Donetsk residents seized the building of the regional department of the SBU, local employees in Donetsk and the region were at their apartments for some time, dealing mainly with the internet and waiting for commands. Only from mid-June and during the next month from Kiev, on the rise, were orders to relocate to Mariupol. Some went, some didn't. There, the SBU department for the Donetsk region is located in a 4-story administrative building of the main department of the SBU at the address St. Georgievskaya, 77. It was it that became the center of activity of the special services of Ukraine in relation to the DPR. Initially, a heavily drinking veteran of military counterintelligence, Colonel V.N. Lizogub, was appointed acting head of the department. During the regional administration, 4 armed operational groups were immediately formed from employees who were tasked with identifying and detaining persons involved in the DPR in the territory of Starobyshevo, Vuhgolda, Novoazovsk. Mariupol City, Georgievskaya Street, 77, administrative building of the SBU department for Donetsk region. And here the employees of the SBU, following the whole of Ukraine, plunged into the abyss of violent madness. The SBU worked closely with the battalions Holy Mary, Azov and Dnieper, and its operatives fully knew the taste of blood. If in peacetime the separatists in the security service of Ukraine were engaged in the unit for the protection of national statehood, then in the new conditions this task, as well as work against Russia, was defined for all units of the Ukrainian special services without exception. In the so-called Donetsk department of the SBU, the counterintelligence department under the leadership of Alexander Karaberyach, who sincerely hated the DPR and Russia, personally participated in combat exits against the DPR, voluptuously tortured and shot militias, showed particular zeal in this matter. In fact, the bosses set an example for their subordinates. The deputy head of the department S. Jitanev, the heads of the sectors D. Lisuan, A. Yatsenko were extremely zealous. Some even found themselves in torture, acquiring individual specialization. For example, Captain A. Liashko, what a surname does to people, masterfully mastered the combination of water and electric shock. It was these people who organized a sophisticated system of torture of prisoners and civilians suspected of sympathizing with the DNR. Only according to the official statistics of the counterintelligence department in this unit alone from May to November 15, 2014, employees carried out 60 detentions of DPR activists, implemented 4 criminal cases under Art. 111 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, high treason, 1, under Art. 114 of the Criminal Code, espionage, more than 20 cases, under Art. 258 Ap. 3 of the Criminal Code, participation in terrorist activities. Due to poor soundproofing in the building of the SBU, an extensive network of ventilation ducts, the sounds of torture were heard in almost all rooms, which is why many employees were forced to leave the building during the torture. The most sophisticated torture, requiring special equipment, or in which the death of the tortured was supposed, was carried out at the base of the Azov battalion at the Mariupol airport or at other facilities. Another innovation adopted by these characters was the detention of random civilians for further exchange for captured Ukrainian soldiers. Against this background, such pranks as, for example, an instruction to subordinates from the head of the economic unit A. Babik about extortion at checkpoints from the owners of cars transporting scrap metal, grain and other inventory items to the Mariupol port, 1,000 hryvnias from one car with coal and 500 hryvnia with scrap metal, did not look so significant. The executioners, who got a taste for it, were seriously upset by the activity of the military prosecutor's office, which very gently, but still sometimes asked questions on the complaints of individual victims. So, in the fall of 2014, one of the senior operatives, Lieutenant Colonel Vasily Bogak, was even detained, from whom the mask was pulled off during the abduction of a person in the Imstor store. A day later, the corpse of the kidnapped was found on one of the streets of the city. Passers-by and acquaintances of the murdered person identified the criminal, which was confirmed by a recording from one of the surveillance cameras, and the prosecutor's office had no choice but to detain the villain. True, he was quickly released and simply put at disposal, but the SBU officers were outraged even by such indulgence to the separatists. However, many operatives, fearing the inevitable responsibility for their deeds in the future, took the path of least resistance. In order to be able to report to the management for what has been done, but not to stain their hands in blood, they transferred their activity to the internet, which was welcomed as a form of information and psychological impact. Countless resources were created, such as News of Donbass, New Orders of the DPR, Voices of Golovka residents and many others. The organization of rallies against the DPR and in support of Ukraine began to act as reporting events. At the same time, in addition to independent activity on the internet, employees began to carry out punitive work against their information opponents. For example, Oleg Silivastov, deputy head of the Department of National Statehood, having entered into a controversy at one of the forums with a DPR activist from Mariupol and suffered an insulting defeat in rhetoric, decided to take revenge. The girl Olga was identified by him, detained and tortured. Alphavets with the detainee drove up to the building, which now housed the SBU department in the Donetsk region. The separat was not received at any of the Azov bases, saying that the issue was not agreed with the leadership. Having phoned the counterintelligence department, which was the initiator of the detention, they decided to bring the detainee to the council. The driver, having bypassed the main entrance on Georgievskaya Street, drove into the control area from the side of the emergency gate from Central. Having passed a shed, under which there were several official vehicles, a canteen, and a gym, where seconded Alfotsi from other departments now lived, I stopped at the end entrance. The elbow fighter pulled out the separatist, whose hands were fixed behind his back with handcuffs. He didn't resist. The look is dim, the head sways limply when walking. We went inside and, having passed the entrance to the assembly hall, approached the room of the operational duty officer, to whom the escort informed that the detainee was being delivered to Karaberiesh. The officer nodded in understanding. They passed by the offices of employees of the Economic Department and the State Secrets Protection Sector, stopped at the door of the deputy head of the department, Jitanev, who was leaving the premises. Letting Sergei Viktorovich pass, we moved on. Approaching the elevator, Alphonse pressed the call button, went up to the third. Only after leaving the elevator, the employee realized that he needed the second, not the third floor. But the elevator has already left. Turning from the right wing of the building, where the Department of Operational and Technical Measures was located, because of which the entrance to it was blocked by a door with a digital lock, we went along the corridor to the side flight of stairs. At this time, the head of the unit, Colonel Merkulov, came out of the door of the wiretapping department. He was gloomy and preoccupied. The other day one of his best employees, Major Palamariuk, suddenly died of a heart attack. We went down to the second floor. The leadership was located here, so it was quiet. The offices of Lysogub and deputies, the head of the Information and Analytical Department and the offices of investigators passed. Next were the toilets and the elevator, which had been so unsuccessfully used before. Having passed a small foyer and another interfloor flight of stairs, we approached the counterintelligence offices. The fighter knew where Karaberiesh was sitting, so he knocked and entered, leading the detainee in. Alexander Ivanovich, allow me? Yes, come in, muttered Karaberiesh, who was sitting at the table. Alexander Ivanovich, here is a man whom Azov did not accept. Yes, I know, we talked on the phone. Well, freak, got it. With these words, the head of counterintelligence got up from the table, went up to the detainee and briefly, without a swing, hit him in the solar plexus. He groaned deafly and fell to the floor, from where, crouching, he began to moan softly. Come on, take this shit and drag it to Ilyashko's office. Yatsenko will fit there now. Karaberiesh himself left the building, got into his black Toyota and drove away for an operational meeting. The separatist was dragged into an office nearby. 10 minutes later Yatsenko came in. Artem Sergeyevich, do you need help? Yes, hold on. Useful at work. Major Yatsenko, a young officer born in 1980, previously worked in military counterintelligence, had a classic military bearing and a pedantic approach to official activities. Together with him was an employee from the Department for Combating Organized Crime and Corruption, Yaroslav Vapolnik. Vapelnik was a member of the Ugalda task force and was directly involved in the DNR. The primary information on the basis of which the criminal was detained was from his source. It could have gone into the report as a joint operation, so it was necessary to pressurize Yatsenko, as the brain of the event, who generally prefers the intellectual component of the work, tried unnecessarily not to be zealous in torture, so the main burden now fell on Yaroslav. It was important to sort out the information about the activities of Vladislav Kuklin, one of the leaders of the cell of local supporters of the DPR. Yatsenko once again looked through the documents of the operational collection and thought. The most significant of those collected were operational and technical materials under the Code 12, listening to mobile phones. In the course of them, Event 17 and Radio were also held to position subscribers on the spot, location determination. To do this, they even chased the service Opalustra with the Varan special equipment complex installed on it for the nonentity now shaking in front of him. After the Opel broke down, I had to bow to OTO 61 and ask for a replacement Black Daewoo Nexia. The interrogation began. As far as biographical questions and further positions about anti-state activities. The interrogated, as expected, denies everything. Yatsenko personally takes the minutes. He hoped to entrust this routine to Alexander Liashko, who, in addition to operational work, also served as an interrogating officer. However, the senior detective at especially important facilities of the first counterintelligence sector, Liashko, was now outside the building, and he had to draw up the papers himself. The absence of Liashko was also unfortunate because during interrogation, as was the case recently, torture was supposed, and Alexander Alexandrovich with his TA-57 military field telephone worked simply miracles. Sometimes just a few turns of the handle, sending current to the right parts of the body of the interrogated person, which had previously been watered with water, were enough for a complete and sincere confession. Well, so myself. Let's get started. Artem Sergeyevich went to the corner cabinet, in which, by common agreement, the necessary funds were stored. It was necessary to choose the tools corresponding to the object of inquiry. It was impossible to underestimate or nullify the helper too quickly, since then all the work done was also nullified. Opened the closet. In a small open safe on the top shelf were several packages of phenazepam, some of which were already empty. No, not that. It was no coincidence that a 3-liter jar of medical alcohol was adjacent to a large enema. Yatsenko winced. Experiments with an enema interrogated with medical alcohol disgusted him. He didn't want to drink it either. Thoughtfully twisted the shocker in his hands. Perhaps a little later. On the bottom shelf are a stack of old towels for water torture. Use it if nothing else helps. It's just too lazy to drag the freak into the bathroom, and the floors there are always wet afterwards, the employees complain. Dangerous razor blade. For Artyom, it was still amazing how much the application of a series of cuts on the face, which for men was far from the most convincing argument, had an amazing effect on the psyche of women, forcing them to say literally everything they needed. But today we have a man. Tourniquets are also likely not needed. Once again glancing at the hard worker, he decided that asphyxiation would be enough. Pushing aside several short rubber truncheons, he took out a thick plastic bag and a garrote 62, handed the noose to Vapelnik and threw the bag over the separatist's head. Mariupol was given to extremists for looting. The Kiev authorities did not care at all about the local population. They perfectly knew the mood of the people and sincerely hated it. Battalions Azov and Holy Mary became the real masters of the new Ukrainian capital of Donbass. The St. Mary battalion consisted of only about 100 militants from among the inhabitants of the Donetsk region and was formed on the basis of the Shakhtersk battalion, which was disbanded in July 2014 for mass looting. In the future, the battalion will be disbanded again and the no less famous Tornado Company will be created on its basis. One of the commanders of all these units was the former Donbass crime boss, the city of Torres, DPR, Ruslan Onishenko, known under the nickname Abelmaz. Even according to leaky and rubber laws, he went beyond all limits in torture, murder, perversion, looting. He, in turn, was subordinate to another prominent Donbass character named Kropachev, who controlled a number of illegal coal mining points, Kopanok. The fighters of these nationalist formations terrorized the local population with robberies, murders, and outright lawlessness. At the same time, the police authorities of Mariupol refused even to accept the statements of victims of arbitrariness, not to mention the conduct of investigations. Kidnappings of businessmen and wealthy people flourished in the city with their further, in 2 or 3 days, their release for a ransom, the amount of the ransom reached several million hryvnias. False accusations of wealthy residents of complicity with the separatists with the arrest and subsequent looting of their property, shops, warehouses, offices, etc. Fraudulent actions to extort money from relatives of the military personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine who were captured. The imposition of protection on the owners of shops and commercial structures were very common. Along with this, the Azov militants, except for their commanders, did not recognize anyone, often even SBU employees, and did not obey anyone. There were facts when they beat the SBU officers. In particular, in early November 2014, they beat up the deputy head of the K department, combating organized crime, of the SBU in the Donetsk region, Lieutenant Colonel S. Samoilov, who broke many of his ribs, and Senior Lieutenant P. Gavshin. But the top leadership has always been on the side of the more zealous fighters against the pro-Russian separatists. In addition to the local SBU officers, everyone who felt like it worked for us. The central office of the SBU in Kiev, adjacent territorial departments. Other departments also did not stand aside. In the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, work against the DPR was made a priority for all intelligence units of regional deployment as part of the 5th Department of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. They were joined by operational units of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Border Service and other more local structures, not to mention the activists of numerous nationalist battalions and public organizations with their oligarchic sponsors. All of them were opposed by the Ministry of State Security of the DPR. I think it did it successfully. Until my dismissal, the MGB did not have a single failure of valuable agents, defections of employees to the side of the enemy, and critical information leaks. And we knew an order of magnitude more about the enemy than he did about us. In this sense, we, just getting on our feet, were head and shoulders ahead of the enemy. Guests from afar. From the point of view of the traditional functions of state security, the situation in the DPR was extremely tense. Ensuring the counterintelligence regime in war conditions is already distinguished by serious specifics. The secret services of the other side and their allies are turning from an adversary into an open and implacable enemy. Work is being carried out in all areas of both reconnaissance and sabotage and terrorist activities. Any ways to harm and get information are being looked for, which we fully felt on ourselves. As I jokingly told my colleagues, the air in Donetsk should be denser and refracted by refractions due to numerous active and passive radiation from all kinds of direction finders, satellites, antennas and other things directed at us. The number of employees and operational sources of various special services per square kilometer sometimes exceeded all conceivable limits. All that was missing for full effect was wearing budyanovkas, black glasses, dragging parachutes and mumbling about a Slavic closet, although some characters came close to this. One can understand the interest of Germans, British, French, Jews, Italians, Hungarians, Americans, Poles and even Moldavians. But there were also quite exotic cases. I am reading a working paper. Opposite, at the side table, sits a subordinate and patiently awaits instructions. Twice a day, at 10 in the morning and at 5 in the afternoon, the secretary brings me 2, sometimes 3 heaps of papers in folders for my consideration. The height of each slide is 30 to 40 centimeters. There are a lot of papers, but at the first stage it is impossible otherwise. The situation must be kept under control. Otherwise, the work, already holding on to the thickness of a horsehair, will simply crumble. Later, the main part can be transferred to deputies and heads of areas. But not now. During the day, I receive managers and key employees on the most important issues, including for the report of documents that are not included in the general blocks of reports. Like now. Listen. And what interest can the Jordanians have here? I don't know yet. Perhaps they are interested in weapons. Well, or through them the Americans work. You know it happens. Moreover, the Hashemites are one of the most active allies of the United States in the Middle East. I know. The habit of Americans to rake in the heat with the wrong hands and squeeze their vassals dry is well known. Well, or help Ukraine. As our people say, the building of their special services is located only 2 kilometers from the building of the Ukrainian embassy in Amman. Okay. I authorize further verification of the information. Material for control, report weekly. As a result, a rather interesting situation developed. The Jordanian resident attracted his former students, graduates of one of the Donetsk universities, to work inside the militia. They joined our ranks. The task they faced was complex, collecting information about both our actions and Ukrainian ones. After I was informed about the primary data on this issue, I instructed a deeper check, being sure that the information was empty. What a surprise it was when it turned out that a special unit of the Jordanian intelligence service Mukhabarat al-Amma was dealing with us with a special level of secrecy. For the purpose of conspiracy, it was called the Secret Department for Combating Terrorism. The difference from the unclassified, which also existed in parallel, was that the unclassified performed traditional anti-terrorist functions. Special was only a cover for intelligence, in particular in relation to us. The residency we identified was led by a young Major, Abu Ahmed, who reported personally and directly to the head of the intelligence service, and had a security clearance of the highest degree of secrecy. Our unexpected counterpart worked in the central building of the Mukhabarat al-Amma SOR in Amman, Al-Jandawal district. As one of the main support environments for intelligence activities, the Jordanians used students and teachers of educational institutions where natives of their country studied. As a result, the agents decided to play not even a double, but a triple game. Positioning themselves as disillusioned with the DPR case, they made contact with the nationalist pro-Ukrainian underground, which still remained in Donetsk by the end of June 2014. The extremists, in turn, having checked them on assignments, came to the conclusion that they were a setup from the DPR. They killed the guys and burned them in their own car. Setting up life. Justice. One of the main Ukrainian arguments against the supporters of the Russian world in general and the pro-Russian regions in particular was a simple thesis. Do you see how bad life is in your Doneria, Leneria? Do you want it to be the same for you? It is difficult to overestimate the degree of cynicism of such rhetoric. It's like a beaten, torn dress, tortured, robbed and raped girl to say, but something you don't look very good. Especially when the perpetrator himself says it. After all, the main part of the problems of the republics did not lie in them at all. We were simply destroyed, and then they reproached us with the same. Therefore, I saw assistance in establishing a normal system of life as one of the important tasks for the state security of the republic. Well, I declare you husband and wife. A young, youthfully leggy militiaman from the commandant's unit of the MGB and his freckled, thin chosen one in a faded but carefully pressed cotton dress awkwardly kiss. I shake hands with the groom and they leave my office. Yes, it was due to the fact that the justice system of the Donetsk region, following other areas, was completely paralyzed by Kiev. No acts of civil status were concluded. But if there are no papers, then this does not mean that they are not born and do not die, do not create families and do not stop them. In general, after another appeal to me as a commander of a military unit with a request to marry, as you know, commanders of military units and captains of long-distance ships have such a peculiar right, I realized that emergency measures had to be taken. Initially, the legal system of the Republic was supposed to be created by Vladimir Yurievich Antiyefeev, who did not have time to do this. I had to solve this issue for me. I instructed to select candidates for lawyers, in respect of which there was no doubt about their loyalty to the Republic and professionalism. Conducted interviews with several. He settled on a young but active girl who proved her devotion to the DPR by deed. It was 27-year-old Ekaterina Filipova. From her student years, she was engaged in independent legal practice and by this time she was already heading the Donetsk Human Rights Group, a lawyer association she had created. The decisive thing was that she was a lawyer in a number of criminal cases initiated by the Ukrainian security forces on accusations of our activists of separatism, and managed to secure the release of several supporters of the DPR from Ukrainian dungeons. At a meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers, I recommended Filipova to the appointment of an acting Minister of Justice and personally vouched for her. At the first stage, I tried to support her, because the importance of justice was difficult to overestimate. From the moment she was approved in office, the creation of the Justice of the Republic began. I didn't paint the militias anymore. True, in the future, Filipova herself was painted. Later, she will marry one of the legendary militias, Timoraz Gogigogiashvili, who became famous for participating in almost all military events, and will leave with him for Russia, leaving the department she created and quite effectively functioning under the existing conditions. According to a well-known Donetsk habit, they will immediately say that she is sitting in the basement of Zakharchenko or even shot. Television. Television was also of fundamental importance for the life of the Republic. In addition to the purely technical and creative problems of Republican television, the main difficulty was the broadcasting of propaganda Ukrainian TV channels, some of which were targeted at the population of Donbass. Gradually this problem was solved. Local TV channels, according to the tradition of that time, at the first stage were distributed by the most authoritative leaders. Oplet.TV, created on the basis of the Donetsk first municipal TV channel, began to control, as the name implies, Alexander Zakharchenko, Novorossiya TV, Pavel Berev. The first Republican TV channel also worked. And there was another one, Union, for the control of which even competition flared up, and here, as always, there were some oddities. After the election of Alexander Zakharchenko as head of the DPR in November 2014 and the reappointment of the Cabinet of Ministers, the Ministry of Information and Communications was divided into two, Communications and Information. This was due to the formation of its own telephony system and the need to concentrate on this task in this regard. In addition, by mutual agreement, the post of Minister of Communications was allocated to representatives of Pavel Berev, whose organization also received a solid faction in parliament and quotas from two ministries, Communications and Culture. Information, of course, had to be under the personal control of the head of the republic. Too sensitive area. At the same time, in order to search for internal political compromises, Alexander Khodorkovsky was appointed to the post of head of the Security Council at my suggestion. At some stage, this expectedly led to organizational confusion. Comrade Minister, we again have difficulties with Union. Which, yesterday, employees of the Ministry of Communications came to the main office of Union, which is on German Tidov Avenue, along with fighters from Vostok. Came to change leadership. In the same place, Dmitry Gromov was the editor-in-chief, and he is the husband of the former minister Nikotina. Well, that's what they tried to replace. Plus, they had a letter from the Security Council in support of this decision. Khodorkovsky signed. So, what is next? And then Roma Lyagin arrived there. He is now in the apparatus of the head, it seems, oversees domestic politics. He came with some fighter of the Central Executive Committee. In general, he said that he would not allow a change in the leadership of the TV channel, since, in his opinion, the TV channel is not subordinate to the Ministry of Information, but to the Ministry of Communications. How did the intrigue end? Well, first, the new Minister of Communications, Viktor Yatsenko, arrived there, who, as it were, supported the old leadership of the TV channel. And then? Well, then Khodorkovsky arrived, who kicked Lyagin and Yatsenko out of the TV channel's office with cuffs on the back of the head. Just a diary of a partisan. July 14th, the Germans came. They kicked us out of the forest. July 15th, the Germans were driven out of the forest. July 16th, the Germans came again and drove us out of the forest. July 17th, the Germans were driven out of the forest. July 18th, the Germans came. They kicked us out of the forest. 26 July. The forester came and drove everyone out of the forest. Education. Another vital area was education, which affected the basic areas of people's socialization. Schools, universities, and other educational institutions covered one of the principal segments of the life of society. Here you need to understand that even if you declare a new state, this does not mean at all that all the old elements of the previous system are automatically aligned to the new realities, especially if your opponent actively opposes it. I saw the fundamental task of state security in ensuring the transition of the education system under the jurisdiction of the DPR. One of the key problems in this regard was the active and persistent attempts by the Ukrainian side to organize the export of legal documentation and seals of Donetsk universities to Ukraine in order to announce the opening of Donetsk universities in other regions. In Vinnytsia, against the objections of the labor collective, a clone of the Donetsk National University was created. In Krasnoarmeysk, the Donetsk National Technical University, and in Krasny Lyman, the Donetsk National Medical University. M. Gorky. The Ministry of Education of Ukraine refused to issue standard diplomas to students who remained to study in Donetsk. It was announced that diplomas issued by universities in Donetsk would not be accepted anywhere. In just a month and a half, we stopped attempts to transfer to the territory of Ukraine resources, seals, and documentation of the Donetsk State Research and Design Institute of Non-Ferrous Metals, DONNIPITSM, Donetsk State Trade Institute, DONSTU, Donetsk National University, DONNU, Institute of Postgraduate Education of Engineering and Teachers, and a number of other universities. At the same time, Donetsk National University was included in the top 500 best universities in the world, and the higher education system of the Donetsk region was considered one of the best in Ukraine. But here we must remember that before that, the entire system of liberal education was built according to the flawed Ukrainian anti-Russian standard. and in order to find some acceptable interface in the new conditions, serious efforts had to be made. In general, some problems constantly arose with the Ministry of Education of the Republic. Only when it was headed by Larissa Polyakova did the work take on a consistent, systematic, and offensive character. Prior to this, misunderstandings regularly arose. So, on December 14, 2014, almost all the doors of the offices of the Ministry of Education of the DPR, including the minister and deputies, were opened. All the information contained in them was copied from the computers in the offices. From the office of the director of one of the departments, Igor Seleznev, a laptop with a large amount of working information disappeared. Also stolen was a hard drive from the computer of the Minister of the Ministry of Education and Science of the DPR I.V. Kostanok. In addition, there was an acute issue with foreign students who had previously studied at Donetsk universities. For example, on December 12, 2014, we learned that a group of blacks had been detained at one of the checkpoints of the Vostok Battalion. They began to understand. Really delayed. In the wake of the general hysteria about foreign Ukrainian mercenaries, ordinary Donetsk guys decided that the black students of Don NMU riding in a taxi were a particularly sophisticated mercenary sabotage and reconnaissance group. I had to rescue the poor fellow students. Another difficulty was the resettlement at the very beginning of the events in empty university dormitories of refugees and militia families. The more actively we launched universities, the more students became, who also needed to be placed somewhere. Some of these issues have also been addressed by us. For example, when resolving a conflict in dormitory number 1 of Don NMU between students on the one hand and refugees living there, militias and former prisoners of war on the other. It was found that refugees were provided with other premises in dormitory number 4, which made it possible to separate students and refugees and prevent conflicts. But they simply refused to move because they settled down. As a result, they took measures for resettlement and closed the conflict. It seemed to be not the work of state security at all, but there was no one else to do it. In addition to purely educational problems, there were a lot of related, but no less important ones. For example, it became known about the conflict situation in the staff of the Donetsk State Library, Krupskaya. There were almost fights. In particular, the acting director of the library, Natalia Petrovna Avdinko, took a clear pro-Ukrainian position, regularly conducted anti-Republican propaganda in the team and tried to organize events in support of Ukrainian writing, pseudo-history and politics. In particular, already during the revolutionary events in Donetsk, under her leadership and with the support of the Canadian-Ukrainian Fund located in the library building. Such events as the Literary and Musical Evening, Collection of Ukrainian Creativity, as well as Forerunner of the Ukrainian Idea, IP. Mazepa, accompanied by appropriate poster design with Ukrainian symbols of a nationalist nature. The woman already during the war managed to frighten her subordinates with the basements of the SBU. Another Ukrainian activist, Tatyana Horovova, director of the Donetsk Regional Specialized Musical Boarding School for Gifted Children, also actively promoted pro-Ukrainian propaganda. But there were also attempts to slander. For example, we received a statement from one of the teachers of kindergarten No. 119 in the city of Makivka with a request to take action against the leadership of the city education department, behaving allegedly pro-Ukrainian. We sorted it out and found out that this was a slander related to the desire to under the guise to take the position of head of the kindergarten. Medicine. Problems with education were also typical of another sensitive public sphere, medicine. If in general the medical community actively supported the ideas of the Republic and was anti-Kiev, then it was among the leadership that there were supporters of the new Ukrainian regime. This was due to fears of losing touch with the unified system of medical bureaucracy as a desirable environment for personnel promotions, an established system of material fraud and abuse. There were cases of passive sabotage, as, for example, with N. Tarasenko, who, being the chief physician of the hospital No. 9 in Donetsk, Yelnitskaya Street, 1A, simply avoided resubordination to the Ministry of Health of the DPR. Heads of hospitals No. 1 in Donetsk, 57 Artem Street, No. 16, Sanatornaya Street, 4, No. 11, Paladina Street, 54, No. 20, Artem Street, 185, tried to engage in similar organizational sabotage. And this is despite the active dissatisfaction of the hospital staff with the actions of the pro-Kiev chiefs. There were situations that were more difficult. Director of the Laboratory Center of Donetsk M. Schwarzbert interfered in every possible way with the work of the Ministry of Health in the field of SES. They began to understand why. It turned out that the person involved in the past was engaged in corrupt activities, was associated with the underworld. After the reforms of the DPR in the healthcare sector, the implementation of corruption schemes became impossible, as a result of which M. Schwartzberg began to be active, hindering the reform. In particular, he held a secret meeting among his colleagues, at which he proposed to stop subordinating the DPR and suspend the work of the SES. Understanding the intricacies of medicine, we have established even more interesting things. In the fall of 2014, it turned out that the Department of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine in Donetsk did not stop its activities on the territory of the DPR. Moreover, we found that this department is reshuffling personnel in medical institutions, conducting various medical courses, etc. All of the above actions are carried out on instructions from Kiev and are issued in the form of orders with the seal of the mentioned department, which entails the deliberate creation of chaos in the healthcare system of the DPR. It suddenly turned out that some medical leaders were appointed by duplicate orders from Kiev and the DPR. The situation was just wild. Naturally, we brought her back to normal. But the doctors of Donbass performed their civil feat every day, without receiving a salary for some time, risking their lives, not having the necessary medicines and being subjected to psychological pressure from their former leaders and colleagues. They saved lives every day by sacrificing their own. So, during the next autumn mortar shelling of the MGB building, some of the mines will fly past and fall into a nearby hospital. A surgeon preparing for another operation will die on the spot. They somehow reminded me of the housing and communal services workers in Donetsk, who in July-August 2014, also without getting paid, went out onto the streets of the city to sweep them and cut roses under the shelling of Ukrainian artillery. The empty streets shone with perfect frequency, the roses were expertly trimmed, and the wounded workers and the corpses of the dead were transported to hospitals and morgues. And the next day, the comrades of the dead again went out to cut the flowers and put things in order. It is through such events that one can understand the real Donbass. Humanitarian aid. An ambiguous situation developed with humanitarian aid. On the one hand, without it, people could not survive. Ukraine, in addition to the war, frankly and stubbornly erected an economic blockade and did everything to make life unbearable for people. When it became clear to the enemy that it was impossible to capture the Donbass by purely military means, a simple concept was adopted. By constant shelling and economic deprivation, bring the people to a state where it doesn't matter who shells and harms. The main thing is that this is all over. Ukraine is Ukraine, let it come, if only to stop it. But they underestimated the Donetsk team. And an important condition for survival was humanitarian aid. However, there were also certain problems in this matter. Firstly, outside the DPR, and especially in Russia, some pseudo-humanitarians have appeared who frankly earn money on the grief and troubles of people under a good guise. Secondly, we periodically revealed attempts of fraud inside. Of course, the main help was a sincere popular impulse. But various opportunists tried to attach themselves to it. In addition to small targeted humanitarian aid, aid was issued in two directions, the state and the Renotokh Foundation. White trucks of Russian humanitarian convoys with their huge volumes of imported goods appeared later. It was impossible to prohibit the Akhmetovites from issuing humanitarian aid. This would sharply set the population against the DPR, because we could not make up for the products issued by the Akhmetov Fund. They were not enough, and the Republic was on the verge of starvation. All that was possible was to force the transfer of products from packages with the appropriate symbols to neutral ones. The first food packages from the DPR were about 10 kilograms. With each issue, the weight of the food package was reduced, as the number of those in need constantly increased. The number of refugees and victims of the war grew like an avalanche. On average, the weight of aid given out in October was 3.5 kilograms. For example, the first humanitarian aid for Petrovsky and Kirovsky districts of Donetsk, which were covered much later than the city center, was 1 can of condensed milk, 1 can of canned food, 1 can of stew, 1 kilogram of sugar, 0.5 kilograms of rice. The issuance of humanitarian aid from the DPR was planned once a week. However, since the flow of people was large, the frequency ended up being once every 10 days. The food package of the Renotokh Help Fund was 1 bottle, 1 liter of vegetable oil, 1 pack of tea, 1 pack of cookies, 1 kilogram of sugar, 1 kilogram of rice, 2 kilograms of flour, 1 kilogram of oatmeal, 1 kilogram of pasta, 1 kilogram of buckwheat, 4 cans of canned food, 1 can of condensed milk, 1 candle, 1 pack of matches. The regularity of assistance is twice a month by appointment and coupons. Cases of distribution of Akhmetov's humanitarian aid were recorded selectively. For example, on October 4, 2014, an incident occurred at the Humanitarian Center of the Akhmetov Foundation. The woman, who, during the previous extradition, was indignant at the impudent mishandled journalists who filmed a story about what a savior and clever Renat was refused help. Akhmetov's employees first issued a ticket, then defiantly tore it up and escorted it out. Like, you do not respect Akhmetov, you are not entitled to help. As it turned out later, the woman was a disabled person of the second group. She has epilepsy. When the journalists arrived, they began to ask questions to the pensioners, in the tone of how bad it is for you without Akhmetov. The heroine of the story, in a rage, overlaid the correspondence with the necessary words. She said that the Republic cares about people, unlike the oligarch who left. In order to pay off people for everything that your Akhmetov has done, every Donbass resident needs to be given a helping truck. At the same time, with his light hand, the Nazis beat the city. Such cases happen periodically, which showed the real face of the donors and the purpose of what was happening. Of course, through humanitarian aid, Akhmetov tried to pave the way for a return to Donetsk. The scheme is simple. The city is brought to complete exhaustion, social and financial. At the same time, the shops under his control are full of food. No money, no payments. Driven to the peak of despair, the inhabitants of the city will be glad to anyone who will help in trouble. It's clear who it is. But his dreams did not come true. In addition to purely food issues, humanitarian aid made it possible to solve medical issues as well. For example, the issue of insulin in June, August, even September 2014 in Donetsk was extremely acute. The distribution to the population was carried out in reduced doses, only at specific points of assistance. Foundations did this for the most part. From the announcement, from November 3, the distribution of insulin will begin on the territory of the Dokmo, Kalinin Hospital. You can get medicines in the form of humanitarian aid in building number 4. We began to severely suppress attempts to plunder humanitarian aid. Realizing that such cases would not have been possible without the support of influential commanders, they began to fight against this at the highest levels. A number of leaders and heads of various departments were detained. At the same time, each declared his innocence. From the internet, it has already been 6 months since the arrest of Oleg Orkikov, a prominent terrorist commander of the Donetsk People's Republic, who led the battalion of Russian pagans at Svarozhichi in the Donbass. This news is reported by the press of Ukraine with reference to terrorist groups in social networks. It notes that Oleg Orkikov with the call sign, Vargan, was groundlessly arrested on the personal order of the head of the DPR, Zakharchenko on November 11, 2014, and since then he has been in the local pre-trial detention center without any official charges. Comrades in arms of our Donetsk branch of the Slavic Association and Revival are demanding the release of the commander of the Svarozhichi battalion, Oleg Orkikov, Vargan. Freedom to Russian heroes. Glory of the great Russian Empire. Glory to Novorossiya. Such messages are full of terrorist groups in social networks. The commander of the 4th Battalion, Oplet, Svarozhichi, Oleg Alexandrovich Orkikov, call sign Vargan, was unfairly detained on November 11, 2014 and is still in the pre-trial detention center. They try to hide this in every possible way so that his unsubstantiated arrest is not revealed. Please make the maximum repost. Help to return the father to the children, and the husband to the wife. 63. Such and similar messages are still actively distributed on the internet. They are happily picked up by the Ukrainian press. Meanwhile, Orkikov, call sign Vargan, was indeed arrested by the MGB almost immediately after the detention of the commander of another Oplet battalion Gulit, accused of a series of especially serious crimes. The initial basis for the detention of Orkikov was the collected materials on the theft of humanitarian aid. It was established that Vargan, even by his associates, was regularly convicted of stealing food for the residents of the area. Further investigation revealed the facts of Orkikov's other crimes. From the case file, in the production of the SO MGB DPR is a criminal case number 122014330, against Orkikov O.A., initiated on November 11, 2014, on the grounds of a crime under Part 3 of Art. 172-1 of the Criminal Code of the DPR. On November 21, 2014, The corpus delicti in this criminal case was reclassified from Art. 172 to 1 Part 3 on Art. 178-8-4 of the Criminal Code of the DPR. In the course of the investigation in the said criminal case, it was established that on August 28, 2014, at about 4:15 p.m., servicemen of the 4th Battalion Petrovsky Oblast, being at the intersection of Petrovsky and Shpagina streets in the Petrovsky district of Donetsk, being armed with firearms, on the orders of their commander Orkikov-O.A., with the threat of using firearms, they demanded from Chilikin A.V., who at the time described was driving a car of the Ford Mondeo Trend brand District AN0189 SV, owned on the basis of a certificate of registration SAE 601147 CJSC Gefest, proceed to the location of the 4th Battalion Petrovsky Oblast in Donetsk, located in housing construction No. 8 along Kremarchuk Street in the Petrovsky district of Donetsk, which Chilikin A.V. implicitly complied with. On the same day, in the evening, while at the location of the 4th Battalion Petrovsky Oblast in Donetsk, located at the address, Donetsk, St. Kremarchuka, D8, the commander of the said unit, Orkikov-O.A., acting deliberately, unlawfully, with the aim of illegally taking possession of a vehicle, ordered his subordinate servicemen, who were all also armed with firearms, to confiscate a car of the brand from Chilikin A.V. Ford Mondeo Trend District AN0189 SV. After which an unidentified serviceman sat down to drive the specified vehicle and disappeared in an unknown direction, while the location of the vehicle is still unknown. In addition, from the Petrovsky District Department of the DGU of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the DPR, the Security Department of the Ministry of State Security of the DPR received a criminal case No. the 14th of August 15, initiated on 11.09. 106 Part 1 of the Criminal Code of the DPR, which was accepted for production by the investigators of the Ministry of State Security, while Orkikov-O.A. is reasonably suspected of involvement in the commission of this murder. In addition, the DPR Ministry of State Security is in the process of conducting criminal case No. 122014338, initiated on November 24, 2014, on the fact of the premeditated murder of 2 unknown men, on the grounds of a crime under Art. 106 Part 2 of the Criminal Code of the DPR, from the materials of which it follows that on November 15, 2014, during the daytime, in the course of investigative actions in the framework of the investigation of criminal case No. 122014330, on the territory of the Kargil plant located in the Petrovsky district of Donetsk, i.e., 2 corpses of unknown men were discovered and examined, previously buried in the ground on an unspecified date. According to the certificates of the SME Bureau of Donetsk dated the 24th of November 2014, the cause of death of both unknown men, found on the 15th of November 2014 under the above circumstances, are gunshot wounds to the head, as well as multiple injuries of the skulls. Sufficient evidence was collected during the investigation, incriminating Orkikov-O.A. in the commission of this crime. In the scope of this case, many other facts of violations of the law by Orkikov were also established. This is exactly how we began to stop the lawlessness. Step by step, the popular resistance was freed from the growths adhering to it, trying to use the situation for their unseemly purposes. The situation with the crisis in the life of the population began to improve only after the Russian leadership intervened in this issue. No one was in a hurry to take care of the fate of ordinary people anymore. By mid-autumn, there were already starvation deaths. Ukraine did everything to bring the situation in our territories to the maximum catastrophe. Store shelves were rapidly emptying, and people did not have enough money. And then they brought food, essential goods, generators, heaters, clothes, medical care, building materials, and so on, without which the existence of the inhabitants would have been simply impossible. I knew that the apparatus of Vladislav Surkov 64 was responsible for this direction. To coordinate work on the spot, the Recovery Management Center, RCC, of the DPR was created. Role of Surkov, September 2014. Meeting in Donetsk at the Altai facility. The topic is social work and an agreement on Minsk. Then the first one. At the head of the table is Russian presidential aide Vladislav Surkov. He skillfully and somehow even voluptuously scolds the DPR Deputy Prime Minister for Social Affairs Alexander Karaman for disrupting the work on launching the new academic year, recording and distributing pensions and humanitarian aid. Karaman is sullenly silent. He does not like. On the other hand, starving pensioners also do not really like their current state. After the execution, Surkov will talk about the essence of Minsk and give all the invited commanders and officials the opportunity to ask their questions and get answers to them. I look at the action with Karaman in a detached way, although I understand that Surkov is right. The problem of civil officials who are not able to organize the minimum sufficient work to provide for the population requires a strict correction. Here you go. I watch her. The difficulties of cabinet workers against the background of dying fighters do not seem convincing. I understand that it makes no sense to address such a high official with your problems. In front of my eyes, several commanders tried to get through to the confidant of the President of Russia with feverish requests to support someone, help with weapons, and punish competitors. Everyone got the same answer: I don't do war. I look at Surkov. Here it is, the dark demiurge. The living embodiment of the absolute destructive. A Chechen hireling, an agent of the oligarchs, an unprincipled manipulator of Russian politics, a skillful deceiver of Putin himself, who confused the President of Russia on the subject of Ukraine. The one whose name, before the Donbass, I associated exclusively with curses from the liberal opposition, one of the early albums of the Agatha Christie group, the novel Near Zero, which I once accidentally read on the train, and associations of a powerful intellectual from power with the images of the Pelevinsky's Generation P and the Hall of Singing Caryatids. I remember how I laughed while watching videos on the topic, Surkov's propaganda, on YouTube. And suddenly, one of the main enemies of Navalny, Sharansky, NTV of the Times of Gizinski, the author of a phased strategy for breaking Russia's informational and political dependence on the West, the concept of sovereign democracy, the architect of the Chechen settlement and the entire domestic policy of Russia with its parties and other farce, hung under its infernal aegis over the Donbass. But that's just it, did not create an ominous impression on me. Neither he nor his decisions. It doesn't mean that I liked them. But in such processes, the desired and the possible rarely coincide. Or was he able to introduce me into the fornication of his sophisticated networks? Again, I'm going through the facts known to me. Spring 2014. Security Council for Crimea. Discussion of how to respond to the events in Ukraine and the prayers of the Crimeans to their elder brother. Many of the senior leaders present have a very cautious position. The price of action is too high. The solution is balancing. And still in some circles they remember the words of Surkov, let me be a half-breed. But I understand that it is impossible to watch from the outside how the Russians are humiliated. Naturally, I know this story in the retelling of third parties, whose dislike for Surkov in other situations, however, is so obvious that I have no doubts about the story, that they didn't enter Ukraine in the spring of 2014. Probably, Surkov's opinion on this issue was taken into account. Or not. I just do not know, but I know for sure whose opinion was undoubtedly weighty. This is a gallant, varnished, well-fed, indistinctly wordy and ornate in adapting other people's arguments to the pro-Russian rhetoric of the Foreign Ministry. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which did not like the cooling of relations with the West, which unexpectedly and so hard began to maneuver with partners, whose employees began to lose long-established semi-political, semi-economic ties and schemes, whose comfort was so sharply violated. I remember a retelling of one of the first meetings of negotiations between the leaders of the militia and Ukraine, mediated by Russia and the OSCE. As several commanders reported on its results, confidently and sincerely calling the Russian ambassador to Ukraine's Europe the representative of Ukraine, his rhetoric and behavior were so pro-Ukrainian. In this row there were also big businessmen with deputy and ministerial portfolios, bankers who invested so heavily in Ukrainian assets. Somewhere there was Surkov with his opinion. But of all of them, only Surkov undertook to somehow solve this problem, and this is how he did it. I have already seen it personally. Badly? Well, of course it's bad. Could it have been better? For example, Gherkin, who, following the model of the relationship between Ilochka Oga and Vanderbildica, chose Surkov's criticism for self-justification and a political springboard, undoubtedly could do better. How exactly? Somehow. I don't know how, but I could somehow. Surely it could. How else? This is not difficult, much easier than giving and keeping an officer's word that I will not give up Slavyansk 65. The meeting at the Altai ends. Surkov asks me and Oleg Boriza to talk to him separately. I'm a little tense. I do not intend to play the role of Karaman, but the conversation takes an unexpectedly positive turn. Surkov is interested in what is really going on in the Republic. Then he thinks and says, I beg you very much. I'm just asking. Ensure the security of the election of the head and the new Republican Parliament. In order for there to be at least a relative order, it is necessary that some kind of central authority be formed. So far, only the name is from it. No need to interfere in what is happening, let it go as it goes. But safety is especially important. I breathe a sigh of relief. The above is absolutely consistent with my thoughts on the topic. In the future, Surkov will assist in solving technical issues of ensuring and maintaining order in the elections. Here's how to write about Surkov. At first, his mention was not planned, but upon mature reflection, it became obvious that the description takes on a skewed look. After all, the influence of this person on the situation was and remains extremely important today, and to describe what is happening without him is to go far from the truth. On the other hand, any filtered positive and negative will always cause accusations of being biased by one side or another. On the third side, well, yes, there is a third one. And it is the only correct one. If you strive to describe the truth, then it must be stated, as you know. It is pointless to be Surkov's lawyer. It is impossible to break the entire long-term and multi-ton load of stereotypes, especially since some of them are probably fair. But I think Surkov does not need my protection, so it remains only to describe part of what he saw himself. Surkov aroused interest not only for his colossal role in global processes. Using the reputation of the smartest official in modern Russia, he created the appropriate impression. Thin, fit, with long, thin fingers of a pianist and an ironic squint, from the category of eternally young, despite a touch of grey hair, with intelligent eyes of a painfully lonely person. He constantly directed the world around him. He obviously liked to set up social experiments and, creating interesting conditions, to look at how those chosen as historians would behave. He took obvious pleasure in the human theatre. Was there among those sewn into wooden cases, crammed into the framework of standards or, on the contrary, corrupted by omnipotence and indifference, drugged by the refraction of armchair battles? Eloquent talkers, these Russian Marie Antoinettes, entangled in their own theories and fantasies completely divorced from reality, bound by blinkers of multidimensional interests of various centers of power, lazy and often simply stupid, sleek and learned to wear suits of fashion brands tolerably, but knowing the dangers of excessive activity from spine bruises and career turbulences, accustomed to the rules of the game, which most often consists in the inadmissibility of objecting to an bossy kick, regardless of its fairness. Intuitively practicing Talleyrand's aphorism that for a successful career you need to dress in all grey, stay in the shadows and not show initiative, brilliantly mastered the skill of treating any of their shameful defeat in defending the interests of the country as an unobvious and therefore more long-term success. Who often saw their main purpose in the service in the skillful mastering of the noble working specialty of a sawmill, and hauler, who perfectly knew the schizophrenic art of saying one thing, doing another, and thinking a third official, the best candidate for such a thankless job that requires to run dry between drops rain, to be a lightning rod for the curses of all concerned. The ability to communicate not only in the mode of cabinet meetings, but also in the field with people, some of whom would wipe their noses at the contingent of any criminal TV show, to generate, make and promote decisions that cause hostility on all sides and participants, but any of their alternatives is many times more harmful to the state interests, while having sufficient authority and trust from top management. I did not know such an officer. During his stay in Donetsk in September, Surkov and his companions will be accommodated at the base of the Special Forces of the Ministry of State Security of the DPR. As a host, I will arrive in the morning and will be able to talk normally with the distinguished guest. I will also ask questions about the problems that concern me about the further development of the process in which I am now participating. I came to the Don base for the sake of an idea that at the beginning of the journey was radiantly clear, but by that time it had already faded quite a bit. I ask questions, I get answers. I can't say that they satisfy me. I think they do not satisfy my interlocutor either. But the situation becomes clear, and I have nothing to object to the arguments presented. In the first half of February 2015, Surkov came to Donetsk again. He himself decided to see how the new Minsk agreements, for which he was responsible, are being implemented. During his visit, the commanders again tried to draw him into a showdown with each other, despite the monotonous words of the high leader that his topic was peace, and he had nothing to do with war. However, peace also assumed internal stability. Therefore, in response to the Tsar's complaints about Khodorkovsky's inadequate actions when trying to break through the enemy into the city and Khodorkovsky's response vision on the topic, he had to understand the situation. But instead of hearing interested parties, the aide to the President of Russia simply drove to the scene of the incident, despite the general vigorous objections. If something happened to him, it would not seem enough to everyone, but he still went. First, the building of the 9 on the outskirts of the Donetsk airport. Under rare artillery bursts, Givi and Motorola report the situation. As they can, so they report. Then we leave for the site of the blown-up Putilov Bridge, which is one of the issues of the problem. I've been here before, the atmosphere is familiar. A large pointer to Krasnoarmeysk and Avdiivka catches the eye. Near rickety lighting poles. The broken canvas of the bridge covered several cars. 2 more wrecked, soot-covered cars stand in front of the bridge. The old white Soviet Cossack looks especially creepy against the background of things scattered nearby and several children's toys. Everywhere there are traces of fire and explosions. From the pieces of the bridge canvas, mixed with dirty snow against the background of bare trees, branches broken by an explosive wave, scattered car tires. It feels cold, no matter how warmly you are dressed. Donetsk, blown up Putilov Bridge. Surkov inspects the bridge, after which we all go to the cars. At this time, from afar, mortars begin to whine like a well-fed mosquito. In the general silence of a winter day, to the creak of steps along a dirty snowy road, Adjutant Zakharchenko Semyon clearly says, "Lie down." The cordon of accompanying fighters falls into repeatedly trained positions. Surkov's assistant also presses to the ground. Surkov tilts his head and looks around curiously. Oleg Beriza reprimands Semyon for a stupid initiative. It is clear from the sound that the mines were not flying in our direction. The adjutant justifies himself. They say, "You need to be vigilant. We're leaving." Already after leaving the Don base, I will be at an event where Sergei Oksonov will be present. When Surkov enters the room, Aksionov will joke, "Well, here he is, the chief drainer of Novorossiya," to which Surkov will smile wearily and answer, "Well, yes. It's me. I drain everything." At the turn of the war, Comrade Minister, allow me to report. Fit and well-dressed, in a formal suit, an officer from a cohort of former SBU operatives, now sincerely harnessed to our common cause, stretched out in front of me, demonstrating the good news with all his behavior. Report. 49 enemy servicemen have already crossed with our leaflets, 12 of them are officers. And the process is still going on. Offensive is a matter of creativity. In addition to the purely military component, it requires a range of special measures both on the liberated territory and in the course of hostilities. Near Debaltseve, for the first time in this war, we tested our propaganda capabilities in combat conditions. On February 12, 2015, at the initiative of my subordinates, we fired the first 122 mm campaign shells for the D-30 howitzer. Each can hold 500 leaflets. In the leaflets, we explained to the Ukrainian soldiers the harmfulness of their situation when the Debaltsevo pocket was closed, offered them not to resist, leave their positions and surrender. In the future, we will see, among other things, the results of these actions. They were very positive. There were quite specific signals about sabotage activity on the part of the enemy at war with us. For example, the operational units of law enforcement agencies at the end of 2014 worked out information in relation to a certain Kamil Valatov and his partner under the call sign Alpinist. DPR leaflets to Ukrainian soldiers with a call to surrender. These persons were characterized as especially dangerous saboteurs with a high level of training, leading a special enemy group. They were recruited from the Sabotage and Reconnaissance Group No. 5 of the Donetsk Company of the Battalion of Territorial Defense of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine DPR-1. The group had such a name because it was recruited from residents of Donetsk who were fighting on the Ukrainian side. Valatov was also a local, he knew the city well. I had to organize a set of preventive measures. The ambushes did not give any results, the enemy left, but he also could not realize his criminal intent. In addition to the conscious transitions to our side of the security forces of Ukraine, there were those who, under the influence of circumstances and their pathologies, using the general confusion, tried to find themselves on different sides of the front. For example, in December 2014, employees of the Ministry of State Security, right at a business meeting, detained an employee of the Prosecutor General's Office of the DPR on charges of involvement in punitive operations against the civilian population of the DPR as part of the DPR-1 Battalion of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. We understood that the inculcation of nationalism and westernization, albeit to a lesser extent than other regions of Ukraine, but the Donbas did not pass by. In Donetsk, right-wing nationalist organizations were formed and were active before the war: Ultras, VO Svoboda, IPO Sokol, NGO Right Sector, Patriot of Ukraine, NGO Trizub, VO Batkivshina, etc. Whose members later entered the enemy battalions, and such as Shakhtarsk, hereinafter Holy Mary by Dmitry Korchinsky, Tornado, Odessa, almost completely staffed. After the release of Strelkov, there were attempts to form the Ukrainian battalion Slavyansk. The activists of these organizations, who did not leave for the territory of Ukraine after the start of the events, fearing persecution by the power structures of the DPR, nevertheless transferred their activities to the internet, disseminating biased information on forums, reporting on the locations of the DPR armed forces, etc. At the same time, however, belonging to these organizations in the pre-war conditions was not an unambiguous indicator and vector of a further position, although, of course, it formed the conditions and prerequisites. For example, the head of the Kalinin regional organization of the VO Svoboda in Donetsk in the new conditions, watching the shelling of his city by the Ukrainian side, changed his worldview and proved his devotion to the DPR by deed. On the contrary, the head of the Shakhtarsk regional organization of the VO Svoboda Yuri Kondrativ became an active member of one of the territorial defense battalions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Two people in equivalent positions of one nationalist organization. Equal selection conditions. But the choice is the opposite. One of the traditions of the Civil War. Football fans of the Shakhtar club, who mostly left Donetsk for Lviv, also joined the Ukrainian battalions of the so-called territorial defense. In the future, some of these people began to return. Of course, many have realized that visiting is good, but home is better. But we perfectly understood that the Ukrainian special services would use activists of the right structures, who returned to permanent residence in the cities of the DPR, to carry out intelligence and subversive activities. Sergei, you do not invent? Well, what Naзвание? An elderly investigator of the MGB in oval horn-rimmed glasses and an old, greasy, but carefully ironed suit, put coasters with tea for himself and a captured Westerner from Lvov with a classic narrow triangular elongated face with sparse mustaches and owlish, round surprised eyes, dressed in a short dirty camouflage, sat down at a scratched, chipped interrogation table and continued to write the protocol by hand. Dyakuyu. That Moser you mean did not reason? Here you have a very good friend, Seryoga. Yogo then asked. Another serviceman of military unit 3004, the city of Zolochev, Lviv region, was found in captivity in the hut, as the building of the SBU, in which the Ministry of Defense of the DPR and the military police were stationed, was found. He confirmed the information that a woman with the call sign Naзвание really served in the battalion. She was Junior Lieutenant Konyukova Maria Alexandrova. She was close to the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Vlasenko Vyacheslav Viktorovich, call sign Filin, and carried out his individual assignments. Our interest lay in the fact that it was this lady who was assigned to a group of American instructors who conducted classes with Ukrainian servicemen. There was every reason to consider the Americans as military personnel. In addition to American and other Western mercenaries, many Slav brothers also fought against us. Unfortunately, Belarusians were numerous. Detachments pursued, Jaguar were formed into independent groups. There were also many Belarusians in the Azov, Donbass, and Ada battalions. The environment of football fans stood out separately. When working with prisoners, I was especially interested in the psychology of artillerymen. It was from them that civilians suffered the most, and it was they who struck at schools, residential areas, hospitals, and churches. Therefore, I tried to personally talk with some of them. Given that I was well acquainted with the Odessa region, in addition to my daily work, I chose the 28th Odessa Mechanized Brigade as my target interest. The brigade was almost completely staffed by Odessans, residents of the Nikolaev region, actively fought against us and, most importantly, had a significant amount of artillery used. The brigade was previously deployed in the area of Odessa Chabanka 66, on one of the beaches of which I once loved to relax. From October 12, 2014, it was located in the Krasnoarmysky district of the part of the DPR under the control of Ukrainians, in the village of Krasnoy. It consisted of a jet battalion of 3 batteries, an infantry unit of about 1,000, and a reconnaissance unit of 500 fighters. In total, the brigade had about 3,000 military personnel. Colonel Leshchinsky and other leaders of the 28th Odessa Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, taking part in the shelling of Donetsk. I talked with the prisoners and found disappointing answers to my questions. The situation in the military unit, which in Ukraine was considered one of the most heroic units, reflected the general state of affairs in the enemy's armed forces. The brigade was commanded by Vyacheslav Leshchinsky, whom the Ukrainian Military Prosecutor's Office will later accuse of losing applications, because of which the formation will be left without supplies and will begin to survive through the help of volunteers and robbery of the population. Moreover, Ukrainian activists accused Leshchinsky, who until recently was called a hero, of selling volunteer help. The results of the shelling of Donetsk by the 28th Odessa Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In the future, criminal cases against senior officers of this brigade in Ukraine will become massive. One of the most high-profile will be the detention of the commander of one of the most combative battalions for a bribe of more than 1 million hryvnia for what Ukraine will call facilitating smuggling into separatist territory. The situation among the personnel was absolutely degraded. Total alcoholism, due to which the term avatars appeared in the Ukrainian armed forces, for the characteristic cyanosis of alcohol adherence. Regular facts of looting. Constant desertion, when only those who could not escape or go to the hospital for a long time could serve. Only on August 25, 2014, there were 57 deserters. I was particularly interested in the Jet Division. From Hizgradov they hit Donetsk. Interrogation of prisoners showed the following. The division consisted of 3 batteries. It was then commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Vitaly Bylenki. In turn, the 1st, main battery at that time was led by Captain Oleg Vladimirovich Mochenko. The total number of military personnel is 150 people, 12 rocket launchers Grad, BM, 21, 40 charges each. As an example, I took the week of December 2014 and explored how the enemy works. The 1st battery left for firing on December 3rd, 4, 5 and 6, on 4 BM-21s, at night. The principle of striking was clearly different according to the situation. Or they were beaten at specific coordinates of the possible location of the armed forces of the DPR. There were not so many such situations, and if there were, then the coordinates were mainly represented by the reconnaissance brigade. The Ukrainian fighters themselves had serious complaints about the quality of the work of the scouts. Often, in order not to risk their lives, the coordinates were simply invented. Another, more frequent option was the need to shoot ammunition and draw up reports in this regard, as well as activity on the eve of the arrival of various inspectors. In this case, they beat me simply at random, in the direction of Donetsk or other settlements of the DPR. Well, the 3rd, the most vile, but also not uncommon option. Just show the separatists where the crayfish hibernate. They beat, realizing that they were shooting at the civilian population. Basically, this happened at night, either after officers had taken a lot of alcohol, or after significant losses of their personnel. Often this happened after the issuance of the next salary, which also entailed increased alcoholism. Unfortunately, it was not the Westerners who did this, not American or Georgian mercenaries. These were residents of the area that was considered pro-Russian. Oh, Odessa, Odessa, crooks. In muddy water, as you know, it is easier to catch fish. Any revolutionary story attracts all sorts of crooks who expect to warm their hands at the intersection of processes, when the old is broken and the new has not yet been formed. This is a fertile environment for those who want to satisfy their needs in an unstable and critical environment. The set is varied and complex. Ambition, political projects, financial scams, and just crazy. Concert by Iosif Kobzon on the occasion of the inauguration of Alexander Zakharchenko as head of the Donetsk People's Republic. The solemn part and the performance itself passed. Next in line is a friendly dinner with the participation of Zakharchenko, Kobzon, the command of the armed forces and members of the cabinet of ministers. I go down to the -1st floor of the Capitol Hotel, where the table is set. Almost everything is already in place. Passing by the guards, I see that a handsome old man of noble appearance is standing in the recreation area. Expensive, clearly Italian cut 3-piece suit, varnished boots, a gold chain of pocket watches hangs on the waistcoat. The high hairstyle of the grey-haired man is well styled. On the chest on both sides of the jacket, more reminiscent of a tailcoat, a scattering of awards. The old man stood motionless, holding his back proudly. Next to this incarnation of aristocracy, a young chubby girl with curled curls in a modest lace dress moves her slender legs. I go further, and out of the corner of my eye I see that Yuri Lextutes approaches, the symbol of misalliance, and talks animatedly about something. I'm on my guard. Lextutes is formerly considered the acting Minister of Culture of the DPR, but he will not be reappointed to the new cabinet of ministers. 2 days before, Zakharchenko, Borysa, and I spent half a day discussing the structure and composition of the new government which Alexander Zakharchenko will introduce by his decision. Among other things, the decision at the suggestion of Borysa was also made on Lexdutes. With regard to Yulia Legovich, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the DPR has collected materials on fraudulent activities, and a little later he will be arrested. I remember my first meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers in the government of Alexander Borodai. On it I was appointed to the post of minister. At the end of a long table sat a man with a mobile phone headset on his ear. At that time I did not know almost anyone from the government. After the meeting, a man with a headset came up to me and said, "Hello. I am the Minister of Culture. Help me. For 5 days I have been under arrest in the Vostok Battalion. How did you get here?" They brought me to sign the documents they need and stamp the seal in the office. Naturally helped and intervened. Lexdutes continued to work in his position. And here Lexdutes communicates with a grey-haired handsome man. Knowing that he was not all right, I decided to clarify what kind of people. I take Lexdutes and ask him a question. Who is this? Oh. These are very serious people. They will provide Alexander Vladimirovich with international support at the highest level. These are representatives of the House of Romanov. And Russian intelligence and all European governments work directly with the House of Romanov. Who brought them? Well, clear. I come back, I go to the old man. Hello. Who are you, dear? I am a plenipotentiary of Her Imperial Majesty and a plenipotentiary of the Imperial House. Dear lady is my assistant. With these words, the girl makes a semi-Nixon. And in more detail? I ask, and in response I hear a confused speech about Matilda Kshizynskaya, Princes Vladimir, Andrei, and Boris Vladimirovich, and complex relationships with the association of the House of Romanov. So you are from Maria and Georgy Romanovs? I clarify. At least I had come across these august persons earlier in the course of my previous activity. No, we are an alternate branch. What are your awards? I turn a few pendants reverse to me. They are big, bright, and meaningless. There are no numbers. State? No, well, public. And whose is it? I point to a multibeam star on the right side of my chest the size of a small saucer. This, you understand, then there is some unique and complex play on words, among which are heard hero, valor, highest, God's will, outstanding and something else. And who established it and who handed it over? In response, again some kind of abracadabra from the association, union, public heraldic council and monarchical experts. Who is the head of this organization? I. So you rewarded yourself? Well, it is more like yes. And how many copies of this award? 3. What about members of the organization? You understand. Clear. The old man, realizing that he is failing, becomes nervous and, apparently, wants to impress me. He inconsistently talks nonsense about his services to humanity. The result is an attempt to put into my hand a CD of Thebes songs in his own performance. On the disc, he is listed as something like Nikola Pitoski. No more questions. I go to the guards, I order them to immediately send the couple out and take them out of the city towards the border. There were crooks with more complicated schemes. In the fall and early winter of 2014, money scammers frequented Donetsk. Their project was called Money of Novorossiya. The internet and even some media were filled with information about the creation of the currency of Novorossiya. Boris Litvinov, then chairman of the Supreme Council of the DPR, was fascinated by the clever rogues. It was from the platform of the parliament that the attack began to create what they called settlement signs. At the same time, Litvinov plunged headlong into this vicious situation, discrediting himself, and as a result lost both the post of chairman of the council and the opportunity to form his political force in it. Although there were reasons to believe that it was used in the dark, not fully understanding the essence of the game being played with it, the idea was justified by the lack of the necessary money supply in the DPR. Ukraine really did everything to deprive the republic of financial turnover. Fighting operations also played into the hands of this, leading to the shutdown of enterprises and the export of cash by businessmen. It was very difficult, but the proposed steps were definitely not the way out. Back in Transnistria, I saw how difficult it really is to create a national currency for a small unrecognized territory, and I perfectly understood the utopian nature of what was happening. In Transnistria, this was a forced step-by-step measure. At first, local stamps were simply glued onto USSR banknotes. Later, with great difficulty, Transnistrian rubles were introduced. If Transnistria had at least some chance to switch to Russian banknotes, the Republic would have taken advantage of it. An example of the so-called Novorossiya money, which is one of the global fraudulent attempts to generate capital in the war in Donbass. But the owner of the currency, the Russian Federation, then was categorically against it. The lack of a common border, the integration of the industry of Pridnestrovie into Moldova and Europe, which implied other payment formats, also interfered. And the constant household turnover of goods between bordering Ukraine and Moldova, in which the dollar, the Moldovan leu and the Ukrainian hryvnia were in demand, did not favor the Russian monetary unit. In the DPR, such measures would lead to complete internal isolation and final collapse. In addition, the introduction of its flawed currency instead of the full-fledged Russian ruble greatly complicated the prospects for the actual integration of the region into Russia. The schemers promoted the following scheme. A large number of banknotes rubles of Novorossiya are printed. The exchange rate is set at a ratio of 33 kopecks of Novorossiya to the US dollar. Prices are being recalculated in the Republic, based on the binding of new money to a certain gold reserve of Novorossiya. Where is it? In the future, the population is divided into groups, and it is given the primary settlement capital. More for those who work, less for pensioners. On average, it was proposed to issue about 500 signs, Novorossisk rubles, in relation to $1,600. Moreover, the first batch of this monopoly money has already been printed. But the organizers of the scheme swung at just global things. They announced that under their leadership a state corporation for the development of Novorossiya was being created, in whose management all resources of the DPR and LPR should be transferred. Enterprises, coal, all profitable industries. To do this, they announced free privatization or the formal buyout of enterprises. But right guessed, for the money of Novorossiya. Lip was not stupid at all. At the same time, the schemers did not hesitate to declare support for the scheme by the top leadership of Russia. From the stands of the press centers, they declared, well, no one from Russia officially objects. So it's all for it. The essence of the scam was simple and obvious. A huge number of candy wrappers are printed, the price of which is equal to the price of paper. Then exchange offices are opened, since the initially distributed coupons only allow you to buy food and distribute debts. And a miracle happens. You give paper through the windows of exchange offices and state cash desks. And in response to you, full-fledged dollars, euros, hryvnias, rubles, and so on. In relation to several millions of the population and the internal needs of industry, the gain was simply fantastic. He would instantly make the swindlers rich. They simply did not care that the scheme would bury the Republic. At the same time, as always, history was substantiated by long and pseudoscientific arguments about the laws of economics and political processes. In general, a fairly standard situation. Naturally, all necessary measures were taken so that history would not have its destructive continuation. There were scammers and more fun. At the end of January 2015, subordinates reported to me material regarding a certain influential stranger. According to primary data, in one of the entertainment establishments in Donetsk, Bar, this person threatened other visitors with a gun and publicly declared himself to be one of the owners of the city. Well, master and host. It means you need to get to know each other. After all, I was visiting Donetsk. Well, he worked part-time on a voluntary basis, as it were. We started looking. The object was driving a premium red Mazda. He either used the ID of the Prosecutor General's office of the DPR, or referred to the People's Council. At the same time, he regularly mentioned his closeness to Zakharchenko. I already had a photo from one of the surveillance cameras, with which I drove up to Zakharchenko. Alexander studied him for a long time, then said that he did not know the man. In general, of course, he was found. It turned out to be a fraudster who was put on the wanted list in Ukraine in 24 criminal cases. The comrade lived in grand style, using his exceptional ability to gain confidence and form around him a sense of proximity to power. The gun with which he threatened was traumatic. The guy, his name was Dmitry, by that time had managed to get acquainted with a mass of local officials, including the ministerial level. He actively formed a network of necessary connections. Zakharchenko wanted to talk to him, as he was mentioned in the speeches of the next Klestikov. I myself brought the detainee home to Zakharchenko. The guy was nervous, not understanding where he was being taken. He was smartly dressed. Expensive suit, stylish shoes, elegant thin fashionable tie. On the finger of the hand is a massive ring, a gold Swiss watch, a large scented handkerchief. Very endearing manner. On the way, Dmitri tried to communicate with me, but I simply ordered him to shut his mouth. We arrived and entered the house. We wait. Enter Zakharchenko. My client jumps up and runs to Alexander. Alexander Vladimirovich. You are my ideal. I voted for you. Thank heavens for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. I have so much to tell you. Thank you for agreeing to listen to me. This is despite the fact that until that moment he did not even know where he was being taken. Zakharchenko cuts him off, asks a few short questions and leaves. In general, this was the one and only case when, through personal police contacts, we sent the detainee to Ukraine, where he had previously been put on the wanted list. Gossip. Besler personally cuts the hands of the arrested militias. It's not arms, but legs. And he does not cut, but a platoon of frenzied young women fashion models. He keeps them in the basement and sets them on the peasants. Stop it. Besler has an exemplary order in Gorlovka, but who is the real executioner is Khodorkovsky. This is what he still has left from the SBU. Khodorkovsky? Yes, it's weak for him to go to the front line. He sits out in his pizzeria. He does not cut anything at all and in anything. He has another problem. He took 10 lemons from Akhmetka to hand over Donetsk to the Dil. From the 5th base he will make a passage, and the Dil will come in. And on the 3rd base, he already has Dil hiding and saboteurs in the city at night. He's an SBU. What 5th base? Yesterday I was on it with Horvath and San Sanik. Everything is fine there. We have a major problem with Gloomy. He is already a billionaire on the money of plundered banks, exchanges, prostitutes and a squeezed bus station. In general, there will be no order. It seems that the MGB has taken over, but Pinchuk is now closed in the basement on Lubyanka. Arrested right in Moscow. More importantly, Zakhar escaped from the city with the loot. Yesterday his Messi dumped towards the border, etc. Rumors corroded the minds of the militias, and the desire to scratch your tongue while minimizing traditional recreation formed a new kind of leisure. From the end of October 2014, Donetsk began to be disturbed by information about enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups allegedly preparing and committing terrorist attacks. A certain garbage truck or minibus was constantly mentioned, on which mortars are transported. They work out targets in the city and hastily hide. There were not so many real prerequisites for this, but rumors developed against the backdrop of a sharp intensification of shelling of residential areas of the city, not only with artillery, but also with mortars. A large number of civilians were killed, houses and other infrastructure were destroyed. The opening of the new academic year in Donetsk ended with artillery and mortar shelling of one of the schools. Given the relatively short range of 2 or 3 kilometers for example, an 82mm mortar, questions arose about the places where strikes were to be launched. The enemy hit from the outskirts he occupied, but there were also assumptions about sabotage activity. We knew that the enemy was trying to train saboteurs and terrorists in an enhanced mode, but at that time we were still more likely to encounter nationalist enthusiasts, thugs or besotted fans. Gradually, the level of systematic training of criminals became higher, as professionals from among Western instructors, who had been forming a similar contingent around the world for several years, were involved in their training. However, at that time, information about DRG-67 was confirmed by hardly 1/100th of the general chatter. This, among other things, made it very difficult for real anti-sabotage work, which was urgently needed. At the same time, we observed to a greater extent the traditional activities of sabotage and reconnaissance groups. The 400-kilometer raid that Ukrainian paratroopers carried out on our rear in August 2014 is widely known. Oleg Kuzminik, a captured battalion commander of the 81st Airborne Brigade, described the details of this campaign in detail to me later with undisguised pride and pleasure. But there were many other attacks by enemy groups. At the beginning of the events, there was information that saboteurs were entering the service of the militia and, using the issued documents, weapons and vehicles, made sorties and crimes. Such information also required painstaking study and an adequate response. Such facts were revealed, which was possible only with a competent professional approach of the security structures. In October 2014, there were several attempts to shell the MGB building. One of the buildings was damaged, almost all the windows were shattered, several employees were injured, random civilians were killed. Based on the constant talk about the DRG, I ordered the formation of consolidated patrol groups for the city, breaking it into sectors. An operational headquarters was created, which was instructed to coordinate operational activities in this direction. Narudka and other services conducted a constant operational search. On October 31, 2014, at the proposal of the Ministry of State Security, a comprehensive interdepartmental plan of interaction was signed and adopted for execution, which made it possible to coordinate the necessary efforts at the system level. There were not so many results due to the excessive inflated rumors. True, we discovered several rookeries and caches of classic Ukrainian DRGs, which, entering our territory, corrected shelling and organized ambushes. My fighters had clashes with them. There were losses on both sides. Several saboteurs, while trying to enter our territory, were destroyed near Gorlovka and Novoazovsk. But this was very different from the information disturbing the city. In general, anti-sabotage and anti-terrorist work required the greatest possible coordination of all power structures and the key participation of a significant segment of my department. Forces were constantly lacking, and it was necessary to find any reserves. A sad curiosity in this regard was Strelkov, who again erupted on the horizon. In early February 2015, he published a pathetic statement in the information space about his readiness to serve in the power structures of the DPR and a request to mobilize him. The media exploded with the headlines, Igor Strelkov is mobilizing in Donbass, former Defense Minister Igor Strelkov is rushing to the front line, and others. Since his message, in particular, said, I have significant experience in operational combat and leading intelligence and counterintelligence work in the front line and behind the front zones, as well as in the fight against illegal armed formations and the bandit underground. In any of these qualities, I am ready to be called up for service in the armed forces or security agencies of the DPR or LPR. Then, as the current Minister of State Security, I decided that without fish, as they say, and pike cancer, there were not enough professionals, and although Gherkin turned out to be an absolutely incompetent and hysterical commander, he really had experience in the field of anti-terrorist work in Chechnya. I have made all the necessary consultations in this regard and have decided to appoint him as my advisor on the fight against terrorism under the guarantee that he will really work and not fan his vanity fire. But waiting for the receipt of this application in my address turned out to be in vain, as well as in the address of other declared addressees. Gherkin decided that an application in the media or on social networks on the internet was sufficient for admission to the service, and it did not need to be sent to a potential employer. Probably, I also had to answer him through the media. It was the new cutting edge in employment and recruitment technology. But seriously, the character again promoted on the grief and troubles of Donbass, far from the tragic events on which he built his capital. Gossip. The special services and law enforcement agencies have such a technique. It is called separation of criminal and destructive groups by compromising leaders. The essence, as the name implies, is simple. Deliberately creating and spreading defamatory rumors can often achieve more than force and money. Who do you obey? You came for an idea, and this crap commander of yours is stuffing his pockets. The technique is simple. Slander under the moralizing refrain. Indeed, a significant and basic part of the power of leaders, especially informal ones, rests on authority. It is he who forces subordinates to meekly follow orders. If you light the fuse of doubt, put into your head the idea that your leader is a scoundrel, a thief, a coward, a degenerate. Then sooner or later the hierarchy of subordination and efficiency will begin to crumble. Such situations are especially pronounced in war. The commander manages in extreme conditions. Fighters are in constant readiness to kill and die. This is the essence of a real soldier, to kill and die on command. Such states, stressful for the psyche of the majority, sharpen the perception of the world, self-identification, and evaluation of people. There were several mainstream trends in the non-stop flow of rumors. On the one hand, the enemy through the media and his agents permanently generated various disinformation. It's inexpensive and quite effective. On the other hand, local confusion, various consequences of pre-war conflicts, and the fantasies of a number of not quite adequate newsmakers created a melting pot for gossip. Plus, some scoundrels, trying to make a political career for themselves in the war, inflated the stuffing of Ukrainians or created their own. You could listen to anything. About caravans of cars with gold to the mainland, about the constant cutting of body parts by individual commanders, about non-stop trading with Akhmetovites and Dil for the surrender of settlements, about an endless string of conspiracies and coups, and so on, sometimes smaller, but no less bright. Some prerequisites for something sometimes happened, but basically I had to deal with complete nonsense. As you know, the sleep of the mind gives birth to monsters. And here it all depends on the habit and skill to treat information as an element-by-element product with its own algorithm. I was regularly attacked by subordinates and activists of other departments and detachments with urgent action initiatives in connection with such rumors. Given the large number of militia enthusiasts recruited at that time, as well as employees with experience mainly in office work, such impulses had to be constantly restrained and directed in a more professional direction. The fact is that operatives of any law enforcement or special structure are divided into categories depending on the specifics of working with information. Let's say that internal affairs officers are not prone to lengthy background checks simply because of performance criteria. The crime must be solved, and the sooner the better. The peculiarities of the activities of state security agencies, on the contrary, suggest a much longer way of working with information with a far from always obvious end result. Here, the initial data, even if confirmed, can be implemented not through criminal cases, but through various preventive measures, combinations, special operations, informing the relevant authorities, applying administrative measures, eliminating the prerequisites and conditions for destructive activity and, in this regard, prohibitions traveling abroad, moving for work, etc. Naturally, within such structures there are divisions into specializations. As a result, departments and employees appear more or less focused on the result or, conversely, on the process. This division also allows you to take into account the personal qualities of the operative. A number of special services introduce such an approach into the organizational principle of their structuring, separating the mining and processing segments. As in any process, one cannot do without extreme forms, which often turn into a routine. As a result, for example, employees appear in the police who are not capable of high-quality activities in obtaining information and work according to the stick principle, when by all means it is necessary to give a stick, that is, to enter data on the solved crime into the statistics. This leads to falsifications, forgeries. And in the state security, employees are being formed who work for a safe and for a table, that is, they take the principle of the number of compiled certificates and other papers as the basis for reporting, without taking into account their effectiveness. In this case, absolute irresponsibility for the authenticity of your documents is born. More serious problems begin to arise when such employees, mostly passively working with information throughout their careers, are given the authority to control human destinies and make decisions accordingly. There were also a certain number of such people in the MGB of the DPR. With bulging eyes, these people brought me all sorts of informational garbage and demanded a reaction. But the special service should just differ from a street shop with grandmothers husking seeds by a professional approach to data. There were problems with this. I had to explain things known to any real professional. Over the years of my rather intensive operational activity, I have never come across information that would coincide at the stages of obtaining and implementing. That's how people are. Even if your source is absolutely sincere with you, then his words are like water going through pipes. Depending on the purity, serviceability, wear and tear, microparticles of communications leave their mark in the liquid. It is also good if it is water, and no less pleasant substances. And people's information reflects their characteristics, coloring in shades of their personality. At the same time, personal interests, ambitions, self-interest, and so on are often superimposed on their communication to the security agencies. As a result, information becomes subjective, and it is precisely the worker's task to make it objective. This should have been the focus of his career. Instead, there is often, and especially in war, the temptation to react quickly. As a result, mass arrests, hasty discriminatory measures, illegal methods. It plays into the hands of the enemy. The phased personnel cleansing that I started was aimed, among other things, at getting rid of such problems, although, of course, such a process should be ongoing. One of the main difficulties in any extreme situation when making managerial decisions is the objectivity and reliability of the information taken into account. This has been a problem on a regular basis. As an example, I recall the regular staff meeting in January 2015, at which responsible officers and commanders argued for a long time about the possibility of taking Pinchuk 68 with available forces. This would make it possible to move the enemy away from Donetsk, and if Mariinka was successfully captured, it would completely stop the shelling of the city by Ukrainian artillery. At the same time, there were reports on the characteristics and degree of combat readiness of various militia units ready to strike at the enemy. The reports were directly opposed to each other. As a result, Alexander Zakharchenko could not stand it and said that he would go to the place and sort it out himself. Oleg Boriza and I went with him. We went to the alleged headquarters of the offensive, which was the advanced stronghold of the militia. We are approaching. There are practically no trees within a radius of a kilometer from the headquarters. Some burnt stovpacks stick out of the ground. This is clearly regularly beaten with everything that is possible. Cold. Dirty snow on the ground, in some places covering potholes from shelling. We knock. A battered soldier crawls out of the basement of the headquarters, squinting blindly into the daylight and looking at us in bewilderment. Who is the eldest? Dora. Division? East? We go down to the headquarters, call the elders, listen to the situation. What powers do you have? There are 8 people. The enemy? Well, 300 or 400 people. Next, we discuss the effectiveness of our artillery and the combat potential of the enemy. Yes? Here's an offensive for you. 68 against 400. Zakharchenko demands to take him to the front line. The fighters answer that he is already at the forefront. Zakharchenko insists on going to the front positions. A young smart guy in a maroon beret with Vostok stripes is called. Pretends to be a cadet. We leave. Here our guide explains that he will not lead more than 3 people. The terrain is visible, and if there are more people, then you need to immediately be ready for shelling and combat, and in a protracted mode. All the numerous, personal, Zakharchenko, Birch and mine are starting to gather. We order everyone to stay where they are. The boys are confused. Semyon and Burkhardt, Zakhar's adjutant and chief guard, argue with him for a long time. In the end, the 3 of us still drive off, plus the cadet, who shows the way. Zakharchenko drives and turns on the radio. Zakharchenko gets into the car behind the wheel, the conductor is nearby. In the back seats I'm with Oleg. It's already a familiar pattern. Fighter of the brigade Vostok with the call sign cadet, the village of Pesky. I know the password, I see a landmark, I only believe in this, love will save the world, Vera Brezhneva sings, as if in reproach to what is happening around us. The conductor quietly makes a remark, and Alexander, realizing himself, turns off the radio. Indeed. We may not hear mine. Dill does not share the philanthropy of the singing compatriot. On the way, Cadet says that he dreams of returning to Slavyansk. He has a girl from there, with whom we agreed to sign only when we take the city again. Through the turns we go to the Volvo Center, we drive into it. Inside, at the AGS with snails piled up nearby, we leave the car and go through the other entrance to the positions. Oleg is the first, followed by Zakharchenko. I cover their backs. We go into a small dugout. All do not fit. We examine the area. Zakharchenko asks clarifying questions. Soldiers from the position warn that shelling could begin at any moment. If it is strong, it is recommended to jump into a large square hole dug at the entrance to the dugout. I look into the hole and figure out how best to fit in. Since I am the heaviest, the question is not easy. If you are the first to throw Zakharchenko and jump from above, then you can break his neck. If you jump first yourself, then it's ugly. A heavy, muddy winter fog floats slowly over the field. The enemy is very close. We finish and go back. Again we were convinced that everything needs to be checked by ourselves on the spot. Closing the boiler. San, where are you going? Entering Zakharchenko's office, we saw him gathering unloading. It was clear that he was going somewhere to the front line. We agreed, where you are, there we are. Guys, I want to see what is there in Marinka. There is an option to take it. Okay, but we'll go with you. It's coming. Oleg and I rush home, quickly change our civilian suits for a hill, machine guns, grenades and ammo are added to the pistols. At this time, the Lichka is rearmed. They are already used to the fact that ministers can rush to where it is hot. We return to the Altai and from there, together with Zakharchenko, we go to the front line, to the Mariinka area. We stop at the greengrocer's building. It won't be there on the way back. We talk with the fighters, and at this moment the shelling begins. First, mines fly, then cannon and rocket artillery join them. We leave for the adjacent headquarters of the company, located in position. Here you can more or less calmly talk. Abkhaz reports, followed by Mongol, then several more commanders. It becomes obvious that the original plan to lead several small groups behind enemy lines at night, and then, cutting off street after street, strike in a coordinated way, is unrealistic. The features of the relief, the strengthening of the enemy and the loss of the element of surprise interfere. We are working on options. At this time, they report that the previously planned exit of one of the units to develop the offensive near Uglegorsk was disrupted. We're going to the headquarters of the Corps to understand. At headquarters, we hear a strange story that the fighters did not go on the attack because they were burying their comrade. In the course of a more detailed analysis, it becomes clear that there are simply not enough people for the offensive. As a result, Oleg raises the entire reserve of the special forces of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Together with the Sokol and the Berkut, about 150 people are recruited. I am adding the MGB Special Forces Reserve. Another 75 to 80. Zakharchenko raises just over 150 from the newly created Republican Guard. We form a column and go to the headquarters of the 3rd Brigade in Gorlovka. For the next 3 days, we are on the spot giving birth to a new offensive plan. We sleep there, in the headquarters. The city of Uglegorsk is the key closing point of the Debaltsevo Cauldron 69. Without it, there will be no boiler. The initial plan is simple. Taking Uglegorsk is dangerous and difficult. Therefore, it is necessary to cut the road to Artemovsk and the adjacent dominant heights. Thus, the city will become part of the boiler. The operation is scheduled for the early morning of January 28. The consolidated assault group should advance to positions from the edge of the forest belt. Since the direction of movement is mined, 2 tanks with minesweepers will move in front of the group. I am responsible for the interaction of the diesel tankers and the assault group. Morning. Precious minutes and hours are lost, but there is no movement. Tankers cannot install trawls on tanks. On one of the tanks there are no lower booms needed to secure the trawl, on the other there are problems with the winch. Beginning of the 12th. We take Zaka to the commander's room and persuade him to curtail the operation. During half an hour after the departure of the group, its location was burned by enemy artillery. When we later analyze the situation, we will come to the general conclusion that what happened turned out to be for the best. Attempts to implement this plan would have resulted in much more casualties and delay than subsequent events. And then Zaka offers to take the city. Corps officers are indecisive. There were no forces left for the assault, everyone was dispersed along the front line of the offensive on Debaltsev. But we insist. We are being reinforced by the Vonya Severa battalion of the 3rd Brigade, which should play the role of a roundabout strike. In fact, this offensive breaks all the canons of military art. The assault group consists of approximately 370 fighters. The defending enemy has at least 1.5 to 2 times more. The basis of the Ukrainian garrison is part of the 128th Transcarpathian Mountain Rifle Brigade plus attached units. Calculation for artillery, surprise and arrogance. Well, good luck, that's the main thing. According to the plan, our artillery is to suppress enemy checkpoints, after which the strike group will launch an offensive. General coordination is entrusted to Mol, who moved from Khmuri to the Republican Guard, the seniors in groups from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Alexei Dicky, from the MGB, Mongol. In reality, my special forces are led by Vasily Lenin Evdokimov, who, together with Dicky, will later receive the hero of the DPR for Uglegorsk and Debaltsev. The artillery fired, the offensive began. You can enter the infantry. Here Dicky reports to Bereza that the allegedly destroyed checkpoint continues to shoot at them. We check with the artillerymen, they contact the spotters, the checkpoint has been destroyed. But what is it? The fighters cannot raise their heads because of the cliff of 70 dil. Oleg insists, the gunners whisper, move away and set a specified task for peanuts. Messed up the coordinates. While our artillery is working at the checkpoint according to the scheme of the Brusilov fire shaft, the guys begin the assault. On the other side of the city, the fighters of the north are trying to attack, but the attack bogs down after 7/300. Our group entered. During the day, several detachments gradually moved towards the center, towards each other. When it becomes clear that the assault was a success, the attackers begin to be reinforced by units transferred from other directions of the front. Sasha, where are you? At the moment the assault begins, Zakharchenko is rapidly walking towards the exit along with Adjutant Semyon. I'll go and see. Where are you going? You understand. Coordination between divisions, coherence and activity of headquarters now rests only on you. If you now rush to the front line, the offensive will crumble. Yes, and scattered groups working autonomously will pull up to you, violating the planned order. We need you at headquarters. Zakharchenko reluctantly agrees. For another half a day he manages the battle on the spot. In the second half, when it becomes clear that the entrance to the city has been successfully completed, it begins to gather again. This time we don't mind. Staff will cope, and in battle our fighters. Let's go. First, we arrive at the administration building of one of the mines. There Zakharchenko communicates with local residents, gives interviews to the press. At this time, I contact my people and pull up the reserve from the commandant unit of the MGB. We sit down with Zakharchenko in a jeep, we leave. Zakharchenko himself is driving, next to him is the instructor of his security, the Dagestani Mega. Oleg and I are in the back seat. We drive towards the entrance to the city. And then an armored personnel carrier rolls out towards us. White stripes. Stripes of pregnancy speak of belonging to Ukraine. Damn, according to the report, this is our territory, the very entrance to the city. Is it a counter-offensive? We are driving along a narrow strip of road in a field. It is impossible to turn off, the entire territory of the roadway is mined. On the way back, we will make sure of this. We're getting ready to jump out of the car. An RPG-18 hangs on the back of the seat. After the car stops, Mega grabs a grenade launcher. No. Everything is fine. Have a closer look. They ride captured vehicles. Identified by the flag. They went out, talked, moved on. At the Dil checkpoint, we are met by Dicky and Mongol, who report on the situation. Groups are moving towards the city center to the railway station. We get in the cars, we go there. It's evening. We stop at a wrecked tank. In a 3-story shabby building opposite, flames are knocked out of several upper windows of apartments in a residential building under a piece of a roof demolished by a shell. The snow is saturated with the smoke of gunpowder. The feeling of a postcard from childhood on February 23rd, with views of the capture of the Reichstag. We look around and decide to stay here for the night. We select a separate building, which used to be some kind of social club. We assign a group to open the doors and equip the overnight stays. At this time, the film crews of the central television channels, led by Yevgeny Podobny, are being pulled up. Zakharchenko gives an interview that later became high-profile, during which a sniper shot is heard. As it will become clear later, this sniper will further correct the work of enemy artillery. On camera, Zakharchenko demonstrates the Ukrainian flag captured from the city garrison. One of my subordinates reports to him the situation. I'll be in the frame. This story will cost me dearly later on. Up to this point, my wife will be sure that I am sitting in a guarded office around the clock. But her father will recognize his son-in-law in the story, drop her a link, and I will have something to listen to. 10 minutes pass, and mines begin to fall. Rarely at first, then more and more frequently. A few more minutes pass, and artillery is connected. After one of the explosions, we are knocked down by a shock wave. Evil falls on me, covering from flying fragments. Kulyab falls nearby. I feel the waves of the earth trembling from the breaks in my stomach. They are getting closer, and I try to bring my legs parted from the vibration. An idiotic thought is spinning in my head that if I now tear off my leg, then we should at least try to save the genitals. I'm trying to contact my commandant's reserve and ordering them to pull up to me. The shelling is aimed, and the spotter must be urgently located. But the leader of the group begins to come up with reasons why he cannot do this, and I understand that he is simply afraid. I'm lying next to a smoking tank. Suddenly, an air plug clogs the ears and, breaking through the cotton wool of oxygen in the lungs, goes somewhere in the chest from the roar of the explosion, blocking the others. Out of the corner of my eye, like in slow motion of an epic movie, I see the turret of a previously knocked-out tank flying over my head. As it will become clear later, one of the Grad rockets hit its ammunition, which detonated. Subsequently, the shots of the shelling, when the sky begins to fall on us, will fly around the television airs in the plot of Podobny. I grab Podobny by the shoulder and yell at him to hide in the entrance next to the house. I run to the nearest 5-story building, and then another blast wave knocks me down. I fall face down into the snow and realize that it's not just snow. His face was scratched by shards of glass that had fallen from the windows of a nearby house. 10 centimeters from the eyes of the ice and the earth sticks out a large fragment. Lucky it wasn't for him. Lying, I wait out the next wave of shelling and run into the entrance. There are already 10 people there. We are located in the hallway. Guys, you go into the wing further away. The floors are more reliable there, it's safer there. A thin old woman comes out of the door of one of the apartments and looks at us pitifully. Crap! There was an evacuation of civilians. But many still remain. Mole runs into the corridor and reports the situation. Where is Zakharchenko? In the next doorway. I run to the house where Zakharchenko is. It's dark, the lights are dim. Sasha. They work for you. Later it will become clear that this is indeed the case. After we leave, the fire will stop. Probably, Zaka's phones and ours took the direction, plus a spotter. We must leave. There is no great benefit from you here, you are more needed at the headquarters. Zakharchenko thinks for a long time and reluctantly agrees. We send people to decide which cars are on the move. Part damaged by shelling. Zakharchenko himself is driving, next to Mega. Oleg and I sit in the back seats. Here we attach Podobny, who is trying to put on courage with the words that he has been under shelling in South Ossetia. He is looking for his operator, who is also put into one of the cars. Behind us is my armored minibus with a personal note. After some time, artillery shots begin to follow our column. Several sniper bullets hit the cars. The narrow-gauge road towards Golovka is suddenly blocked by a stuck minibus. We jump out and try to push the car out on our hands. Doesn't go. We get into the jeep and try to drive around. Mines. The side of the mine is a large cone, one sticking out right from under the wheel of our car. Lucky it didn't explode. Slowly we move back into the rut. The stuck car finally starts moving, and we follow it. At this moment, a wave of hail reaches us. Hailstones fall right behind me, one of them falls on my armored minibus. The fragments will break the bladder and pierce the legs of Evil, crumble the leg of Malta. My work briefcase, which I left to the guards, is also on fire there. We are in a jeep. Sonia, hurry up. Thoughtful Zaka adds gas. He is absolutely calm. Being with him more than once on the front line, I always noticed this stiffening calmness. His courage is not feigned and is absolutely natural. We drive past the administration building of the mine. There is my rotten reserve. I order to organize the evacuation of the wounded. A little further we transplant Podobny into another car, which goes forward. We ourselves also start off. The firing starts again. The car windows are broken, it's cold. I am sitting on the left and, putting the machine gun out the window, I look at the fields. Bariza is sitting nearby in the same position, with a machine gun in the right window. The night, without stopping, is pierced by meteorites of shelling. There is a sound behind him, as if children are throwing small gravel. I put on a hood, but it does not get warmer. Upon arrival, we will see that the entire trunk is excised with fragments. 2 more Zaka's personal cars are following us. A little later, one will fall behind. The old one, who was driving, will take a fragment that will enter the body through the side. He is wearing a bulletproof vest, which will do a disservice. A fragment from the inside will hit the armor wall, bounce into the opposite one and cook a bloody mess from the insides. There are many wounded among us. There are no dead. We consider this a miracle, because what just happened to us could not have ended so easily. Lucky. We're going to Golovka. Absolutely dark, no one really knows the way. We stop at a fork. One road leads to Golovka, the second to the Ukrainian checkpoint. Where is what? We will go right, but there will be those who make a mistake. We arrive, we tumble into the headquarters. I put the gun against the wall and go to wash. A staff officer jumps up and puts it on the safety. Damn, I forgot. DPR assault group in the city of Uglegorsk. Fight for the city. A day later, Zakharchenko will again break out to Golovka to coordinate the cleaning of Uglegorsk and the further closing of the boiler. We will go after him and persuade him to come back with us, because the whole mechanism of the civil administration comes to a standstill with his departures. A lot of things have accumulated. On the way back we will be fired upon with 82mm mortars. A mine or projectile does not fall at all like in a movie. In the movies, it happens terribly epic. You sort of evaluate the whistle, the roar, the consequences and the logical information separately. In fact, it's a strange feeling. Everyone probably has their own. I personally felt like a nail. Nails lined up in a row awaiting a hammer blow, and a huge hammer from the sky hammers you into the ground. How is this war different from other recent ones? What did volunteers with combat experience burn on? In no other local war of the past years was there such a massive use of artillery and military equipment. There are more often shooting battles, sometimes mortars. Center of Uglegorsk. After battle, here, the war went on with the army of the largest European country, which, from a bunch of declassed rabble under the influence of Western advisors, foreign money, sent weapons and combat experience, well-organized propaganda to fool the local population, turned into a skewed, but large and shelled army. I once heard a dialogue between two Russian volunteers. Why are you without armor and helmets? Yes, I always fight like that. It's more comfortable for me. More mobile. This iron does not save anything. I was in Chechnya all the time. Fool. Said the more experienced, who had already fought in the Donbass. There is a minimum of shooting combat here. We are being bombarded with artillery and tanks. This is when cleaning the greenery, you can jump like that. And hear the bulk of the deaths and wounded from shells and shrapnel. In this sense, we are Chechens here. Mid-January 2015. I come to the then headquarters of Zakharchenko at the Altai facility to work with documents and discuss problems. I go up to the second floor, and at the entrance to the reception room I run into him. 25 again. Old song. Unloading, automatic, standing at the door. Sonia, where again? Yes, everything is fine, Andreyuka. I'll just see what's on Marinka. I'll just take a look. Damn, I'll just look. I don't have time to change. Zaka jumps into the car. Okay. I'm going with him. We're going to the gas station. In the gas station cafe, Zaka, Zakharchenko's assistant Semyon and Dima Burkhardt are drinking coffee. Then we roll on. We pass part of Alexandrovka along Shkolnaya Street. Tank destroyed in Uglegorsk. A few minutes after shooting, a Grad rocket will hit his tower, the ammunition will detonate and the torn-off tower will sweep over the heads of the fighters. A fragment of the transfer of Yevgeny Podobny about Uglegorsk. When filming, the author of the book got into the frame. Stop, you can't go further by cars, they'll fire at you. We leave. All in slides, hats, masks. Alone me in a black cashmere coat and Italian Mario Bruni boots. Oh, what a beauty. Italian boots are uncomfortable in mud and ice. Normal army winter berets at home. Since that time, I will constantly carry a spare set of slides in the trunk. While gliding, I hasten to follow Zaka, who is quickly walking along the last houses of the village, and I remember how I bought these shoes. Mid-September 2014. Gradually getting colder. There are no warm shoes. I expected to go home for it or buy it in Rostov, but I can't escape at all. I ask Adjutant Maxim to find out where in the city you can buy shoes. Andrei Yurovich, I found it. There is a shop here. They are being sold, the owners have left for Kiev. Used to be very good shoes. Closed now but still open. Let's go. Small neat shop. I order the guards to stay on the street. I myself go inside with Maxim. I forbid Maxim to take a machine gun. We enter. Sweet, slightly frightened girl. Please show me the size of the shoes I need. She brings, I measure. Here I notice her excitement. What's happened? You hurry? No. Everything is fine. I follow her gaze, I see that she is looking out of the glass windows into the street. And then I understand what's the matter. Maxim. Well, disperse the Lichka. What the hell are they like? My fighters, having set up along the perimeter, cordoned off the store and took up combat positions. Anyone would be stressed. Sorry, they can't switch from the war, I mutter, paying for the chosen shoes. And here I am in these boots in a hurry to our advanced Mariinsky positions. Why, when you are in shape, is it not as noticeable as it is slippery, dirty and cold here? To get to the trenches dug on the hill, you have to climb the embankment. Someone manages to jump up with a run, someone has to rest his knee on the dank ground. Army hill allows. Here, A cashmere coat does not allow me. Somehow I'm climbing. I jump into the trench. Comrade Minister, bend down. You are alone in a black coat, the best target for a sniper. I don't care about the sniper. The boots were almost completely immersed in the mud, and from the adhering grass mixed with the mess, reminiscent of spools for adobe village houses, they became 3 times heavier. Here is the problem. Zakharchenko examines the territory and positions of the enemy. After briefly listening to the report of the senior commanders in this direction, I recalled to and asked them to show me the waste heap where my soldiers died. A week before this trip, the then commander of my special forces, Mongol, reported to me about 271 on one of the waste heaps of Mariinka. The soldiers died during a reconnaissance mission with the task of collecting information about Ukrainian forces. Since the event was not authorized by me, I appointed an internal check on what happened. But the test is the test, and the opportunity to see the scene with your own eyes should never be missed. The spoil heap is located much to the left of the main direction of the enemy forces, but provides an excellent opportunity to control the environment. The guys climbed up and were shot there. The investigation must answer the questions of causes and perpetrators. But I myself see the blind zones of the enemy's approach withdrawal and understand the miscalculation of the planning of the event. Apparently, there was a meeting with a sabotage and reconnaissance group, which itself chose the waste heap to monitor us or put up snipers. Home. Morning, February 3, 2015. Breakfast is served in the living room. Tea, sandwiches. Oleg Beriza and I used to have a snack on the large bay window of the living room in order to enjoy the morning sun at least a little before the upcoming daily frantic fuss. I'm the first to leave for breakfast. Oleg is still getting ready in his room. I'm restless. I do not know why. I myself cannot formulate the reasons for nervousness. In the distance, rare explosions of mines are heard, but they shoot constantly. They have long been accustomed to this. I go into the living room. I don't sit down at the table. I return to the stairs. I go down to the basement. Check the lighting, doors. Everything is fine. Again I go up to the living room. Oleg has already gone down. Listen, let's have breakfast in the basement, I say. For what? Nice day, what's the point of going down? I don't know, I don't understand myself. I'm kind of uneasy. All right, it's all right. Now let's eat quickly and go to work. Well, okay, I agree, and we sit down to have breakfast. The first shell will make the whole house shudder. I'm already ready for something like this, so, turning in my chair, I grab my briefcase, turn around to the stairs and shout, PM, and the hostess, who helps us around the house, go down to the basement. We run. The next hour and a half irons us almost non-stop. Shells and mines fall around the house, everything is shaking. Obviously they work for us. Coming out after the end of the concert, we see the burning remains of a neighbor's house. Some of the explosions scattered across the street. Since then, Oleg has never doubted my intuition, and one day I accidentally saw a recording of a fragment of this shelling on the internet. 72. I went to Donetsk for a couple of months. Then it was normal. Many of those who wanted to take part in the defense of Donbass took vacations and went where their conscience, ideals and principles told them to go. Some for a week, some for a month, some for several. In fact, no one then thought that all this would last for years. When it became clear that the story was dragging on, the condition of many began to resemble the plot of Vladimir Vysotsky's song about a sprinter who was forced to run a long one. I was no exception. While working in a senior position in one of the large corporations, he took a vacation and went. When my trip dragged on, I eventually had to quit, devoting myself to the Ministry of State Security of the DPR. However, everything that has a beginning, as you know, has an end. Constantly postponing my departure for a short time, I defined the horizon of my stay in Donetsk as a new year, 2015. But I had to stay longer, and now the time has come to decide how to be. Alexander Zakharchenko called to stay in Donetsk forever. It was pretty seductive. I liked the city. Beautiful streets, modern infrastructure in the good sense of the word of a European city, few could leave indifferent. The spring of 2015 was approaching, and, despite the nakedness and greyness of late winter, the approaching smell of roses from this bright region was already felt. The nature around Donetsk made it possible to satisfy the most demanding tastes. The work I was doing was understandable to me and allowed me to fully fulfill myself. In fact, everything I planned worked out. True, over time, the question of what to do with the family arose more and more sharply, but for the time being I put it off. But why all these pastorals in the war? There was another side of the problem related to the original goals. I kept reminding myself why I'm here. I came to help protect people. Came for a big idea, like many others. After all, almost everyone went disinterestedly, and not to build a career and equipped life. There is a phrase attributed to Napoleon, I know many who are ready to kill for money, but I do not know anyone who would be ready to die for money. And indeed, it is impossible to die for money or other material goods. Then you just can't use them. There are completely different motives. Anything, but not material. Help for loved ones, ambitions, complexes, ideals. After all, the war in the Donbass dictated the understanding of a very likely death from artillery and other poorly calculated causes with a large radius of chance, in contrast to, say, a classic shooting battle. Yes, and there were no special carpets. Much more was provided instead. The opportunity not to be indifferent to evil, to get in touch with the great process, to be in it, and not smolder in the sand battles of everyday life. I remember why I came. And he made the final decision to turn the page when he realized the prospect of a change in the situation. Once again I decided to trust my intuition. On February 12, 2015, the second Minsk agreements were signed. The level of signers of this document was extremely high. The heads of Russia, Germany, France, Ukraine, and the OSCE signed it. Moreover, on February 17, the UN Security Council approved the document by its decision. It became obvious that the diplomatic machines of all the leading countries took the agreements as the basis for all future activities. That is, a strategic decision was made about peace. The reasons for the parties were different, but the fact remained. This decision, of course, could not be implemented at once. The Debaltsevo operation was just coming to an end, and the Minsk documents did not particularly affect the real desire of the most combative representatives of the parties to make war. Their goals were completely different. But we were running out of resources for the offensive, and Ukraine was simply not able to attack for military-political reasons. It became clear that the Kiev government had decided for itself, Donetsk and Luhansk are not needed by Ukraine under these circumstances, because the capture of the republics in the new conditions created more problems for Kiev than it solved. Violation of the Minsk agreements would turn Ukraine into a rogue state, which Western countries were not interested in. The unbearable burden for the Ukrainian economy of restoring the cities of Donbass was also frightening. As a result, Kiev would receive in its rear, and not behind the demarcation line, several million residents of Donbass, who remember who bombed and destroyed them. And also a lot of fired, desperate, tired of the Kiev authorities and asking very uncomfortable questions, nationalists and pro-Ukrainian activists, who would have nothing to keep at the eastern borders. The euphoria would quickly pass, and the problems would become critically aggravated. The new Maidan turned into a question of a very short time. Of course, a full-fledged peace was impossible, and from the point of view of Kiev and its allies, it was also inexpedient. Yes, and you cannot keep 100,000 mass of people at the front in constant tension without letting off steam. Therefore, provocations and local clashes with regular shelling and exacerbations, which should form the feeling that it is about to begin, were inevitable. Not peace, but not a war with the aim of provoking us to attack first on the verge of a foul. Moreover, there was still a backlash for clashes without a direct violation of the Minsk agreements. The territories recaptured by the DPR during the Debaltsevo offensive were not formally included in the agreed zone of demarcation. That is, according to the logic of the enemy, theoretically, the attempts of the Ukrainian forces to seize them were not a violation. Plus, there were a number of settlements and territories in the so-called grey or neutral zone, which were also a sphere of confrontation. According to my forecasts, this situation could last for several current years, while the parties and real actors, thinning the ghostly fabric of Minsk, at the pace of a leisurely waltz will exchange curtsy, pushes and blows, looking for each other's weak points and cutting through windows of opportunity. For Russia, it will be vital to continue the battle for all of Ukraine. It is obvious that, according to the logic of the Russian administrative centers, the legal rejection of the People's Republics and consolidation of this in the form of recognition at the state level will become conditionally possible only after unambiguous conclusions about the long-term loss of Ukraine. Until then, the Donbass will actually be transferred to the Russian rails, which it itself stubbornly strives for, but with the preservation of the political gap of the multivariance of decisions. And the less war becomes, the more against the background of muddy paramilitary instability all the inevitable distortions of the first stages of the construction of any state, multiplied by the unrecognizedness and ambiguity of the further vector of development, will manifest themselves. With corruption, deep fatigue of the people and the devaluation of the original ideological attitudes. In this regard, the further development of events for me was predictable. I soberly weighed the situation and decided to resign. I was the Minister of War. Arriving in Donetsk at the beginning of July 2014, when local clashes escalated into a large-scale war, he participated in the protection of the local population, the construction of his department, and the security of the Donetsk People's Republic throughout the war period. And it was logical that I would lay down my post after the actual completion of a full-fledged war. The function of the startup of the MGB was successfully carried out by me, in the opinion of all those whose opinion was important to me. At this time, Alexander Zakharchenko was in the hospital with a wound after the DPR operation. Slurping borscht prepared by his wife from a saucepan in the hospital ward, I informed him of my decision. Oleg Bereza supported me. For Zakharchenko, this was unexpected, and he tried to convince us to refuse. But we explained our arguments and asked them not to interfere. During the fighting in DPR, Zakharchenko showed himself heroically and was wounded in the heel. At that moment, my employees were next to him, and I knew the circumstances of the incident well. He miraculously survived. The wound, despite the seeming frivolity, turned out to be very problematic. More than 100 bone fragments were hard to grow together. The pressure on the leg when walking did not allow the drainage to fix in the channel of the bullet hole, which was also influenced by the restless nature of the head of the DPR, who did not want to observe minimal bed rest. Before we left, we decided to celebrate our friend somehow. Since the previous rank of lieutenant colonel was assigned to him by Bereza as his then deputy, I suggested that he be awarded the rank of colonel. It was quite honorable and appropriate. As I later jokingly say to Zakharchenko, be equal to the Russian emperors. There was no clear mechanism for conferring military ranks in such a situation. The military registration system, the standards of the armed forces, etc., were only being developed, and Zakharchenko was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Republic, so I just came up with and proposed the form of a joint order of the MGB, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Defense on this occasion. And so they did. I devoted the next few days to preparing for the surrender of my post and farewell to the personnel. He organized a small banquet at which he said goodbye to each of the heads of departments of the department. The invitees handed me a mold ring with the symbols of the MGB, a book about Donetsk with autographs of each, and a letter of thanks from the whole team with good and warm words. Zakharchenko offered to introduce the position of honorary minister for me, but this already turned the administrative situation into a farce, and I insisted on not doing this. On my instructions, the lawyer of the MGB prepared draft decrees on the resignation of powers for my and Oleg's departments. Zakharchenko reluctantly signed them under our promise that we would look around, rest and think about returning. He will then be convinced for some time that we will come again. We laid down the positions on March 1, 2015. It was the birthday of Oleg Bereza, which we celebrated together with several heads of the Ministry of State Security and the Ministry of Internal Affairs and with the participation of Alexander Zakharchenko. So, listen to my command. Standing up to make a toast, Zakharchenko examined the people sitting. Who is responsible for your special forces? I, comrade head. Igor Melnikov, one of Bereza's deputies, jumped up. So it is. The ministers resigned, which means they are now ordinary citizens. But they are also my friends. I don't want my friends to leave me. All clear? That's right, Alexander Vladimirovich. Everyone laughed and gradually dispersed. In the middle of the night, the senior personnel told me that some events were being prepared. In the morning my special forces commander called, also reported that he had heard about some actions against me, and assured me of his loyalty. I thanked them and ordered them to do nothing. On March 2, plane tickets from Rostov had already been bought. Should not be late. Before leaving, we were finally convinced that Zakharchenko's instructions were taken seriously. Exits from the city are closed. Well, at least some entertainment, so that it would not be so sad to leave. We're on the bypass trails. A disc of patriotic songs plays in the car radio. Farewell, mountains, you know better. Who were we in a distant land? Let not judge one-sidedly. Us office clerk. Maxim always tried to guess the mood and put on the appropriate music. But here he clearly overdid it. I look at the Donbass landscape running through the window and try to figure out how to change the words so that the song becomes even more thematic. Well, we change mountains into waste heaps. Or better mounds. Farewell, Barrow, you know better. On the other hand, the waste heap is an artificial mountain-like. Meanwhile, the Blue Berets continue to sing their now timeless hit with anguish. We are no longer destined to return here. How many of us died in this long campaign? And things are not completed completely, but, we're leaving, we're leaving, we're leaving, we're leaving. Yes. I ask Maxim to put something else. Oleg at this time scolds his former subordinates, who did not take control of all the roads. In vain scolds. Ambush, SWAT police surround our vehicles. There are too many of them. The fighters, apparently, were not informed that the event was a training event and were serious about it. Oleg comes out, the household is his. Melnikov must be somewhere. Ah, here he is. Birch demands to be let through, but now the former deputy, averting his eyes and hiding his smile, refuses, referring to the command of the head. Melnikov has problems at work and in relationships in the team, and it is dangerous for him to violate the order of the commander, albeit a joke. Oleg calls Zakharchenko, talks about the plane, hands over the phone to Melnikov. He receives an order, sighs and gives command to the special forces. Hugs, let's move on. Thanks to this incident, the Ukrainian leadership will claim that the DPR interior minister was arrested while trying to export several $1 million and gold. Then I will tease him for a long time. Exactly until such a heresy will be written about me. After this, the proposals to share the loot will become mutual. Donbass gave me a lot. I had the honor to get in touch with the living thread of history. I saw people and events that are the bare nerve of real Russia. Events in which a person truly revealed himself, being able to show only the best or worst qualities, without any middle ground. Where some stereotypes collapsed, while others took the form of dogmas and axioms. Speaking of which, already now, many people are stretching the fabric of speculation and lies, decorated with other people's complexes, ambitions, self-justifications and weaknesses, onto the frame of truth. I saw the highest forms of human sacrifice, raising seemingly ordinary people above the imaginary moderators of the world, and the lower forms of human fall, often going side by side, where the strength and weakness of the spirit elevated the latter above the former and lowered the former below the latter. With shallow muddy puddles where bottomless lakes seemed, and unexpected depths, I saw heroes who were called traitors and traitors who were called heroes. The experience of these events is invaluable. I was very lucky. A new stage in the life of Donbass is coming, where we went with the determination to die for our ideals, and we leave with a sense of duty, not completely fulfilled, but fulfilled to the maximum. What awaits you next? Donbass. Moscow, June 2016. Applications. Application number 1. Donetsk People's Republic. Council of Ministers. Decree. Number 17-5 dated July 17, 2014. About creation. Ministry of State Security. Donetsk People's Republic. In accordance with Article 80, Paragraph 16 of the Interim Constitution of the Donetsk People's Republic, the Council of Ministers decides 1. Create the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. 2. The Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic, within a month from the date of entry into force of this resolution, in the prescribed manner, prepare and submit to the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic a draft resolution of the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic, which provides for the approval of the regulations on the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic, the establishment the maximum number of military personnel, state civil servants and other employees of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. 3. The Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic, within 3 months from the date of entry into force of this resolution, in the prescribed manner, prepare and submit to the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic for submission to the Supreme Council of the Donetsk People's Republic a draft law of the Donetsk People's Republic on state security bodies of the Donetsk People's Republic. 4. The leadership of the Ministry of Defense of the Donetsk People's Republic, the Special Committee, the Vostok Battalion, other special and military formations of the Donetsk People's Republic, within a week from the date of entry into force of this resolution, submit their proposals to the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic on the use of available resources and capabilities, conducting intelligence, counterintelligence activities, combating terrorism and extremism, protecting and guarding the state border, ensuring the security of senior officials and facilities, protecting the state system and state secrets, combating corruption, organized crime and other criminal manifestations that threaten the statehood of the Donetsk People's Republic. Determine that the further activities of these units in the indicated areas outside the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic is illegal. 5. Determine that the main and coordinating body for the implementation of the state functions specified in Clause 4 of this resolution is the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic, which regulates the procedure, areas, competencies, forms and methods for their implementation, with the exception of the activities of the military intelligence structures of the Ministry of Defense of Donetsk People's Republic. The specified activity in other formations without the consent of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic and its authorization is prohibited. 6. From the moment this resolution comes into force, to prohibit the activities of the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Service, and other special services of Ukraine on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. Prohibit the provision of assistance to these structures by persons residing on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. If such assistance is provided, give it a legal assessment in the form of a crime against the interests of the Donetsk People's Republic. 7. Determine that all property, real estate, territory, archives, and other resources of the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the Office of the State Guard of Ukraine, the State Border Guard Service located on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic shall be transferred to the jurisdiction of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. 9. The Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic to inventory and register property previously owned by the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Guard Service on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. 10. All military, security, special and other formations of the Donetsk People's Republic, currently temporarily occupying buildings and structures that previously belonged to the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Service on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. Take all efforts to release them and transfer them to the owner represented by the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic, relocate and vacate the said premises. Transfer to the owner also vehicles and other property that previously belonged to the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the Office of the State Guard of Ukraine, the State Border Service on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. In the absence of such an opportunity, coordinate with the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic the procedure for the temporary location and use of these buildings, structures, and property. 11. The leaders of the military and special formations of the Donetsk People's Republic within a week to agree on the stay for a transitional period in these premises, which is possible only in agreement with the owner represented by the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic when drawing up the relevant documents on temporary use. In this case, the bodies, military and special formations are obliged to take comprehensive measures to preserve the temporarily occupied buildings, structures, as well as all available property, documentation, communications, and other resources intact. The heads of the relevant military, special and other formations temporarily occupying the territories, premises and other resources of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic, which previously belonged to the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Guard Service, are personally responsible for the implementation of this provision. On the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. 12. Exclude any actions to attract resources that previously belonged to the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Service on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic, without permission and agreement with the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. 13. Heads of military, special and other formations of the Donetsk People's Republic, who involved in their activities premises, vehicles, resources that previously belonged to the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Guard Department of Ukraine, the State Border Service on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic, after agreement with the owner of the use, to ensure unimpeded access of employees of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic to documents, archives, premises, communications and other resources that are under their control and in actual possession at the moment. 14. Employees of the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Guard Service, located on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic, within 5 days from the date of entry into force of this resolution, arrive at the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic for registration, passing recertification, and resolving the issue of further service. Failure to comply with this requirement is regarded as a conscious opposition to the activities of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. In case of failure to appear, these persons are subject to deportation from the Donetsk People's Republic. This provision does not apply to relatives and family members. 15. The Minister of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic should develop measures to create conditions for the adaptation of recertified employees who previously served in the Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, the State Security Department of Ukraine, the State Border Guard Service located on the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. 16. The Minister of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic to act as an applicant during the state registration of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic as a legal entity in the executive authority that carries out state registration of legal entities and individual entrepreneurs, as well as take further steps to open settlement accounts of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. 17. The Ministry of Finance of the Donetsk People's Republic, within a month, develop and submit for approval a normative act that determines the procedure and mechanism for financing the activities of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. 18. Control over the activities of the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic is assigned to the first Deputy Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic, responsible for working with law enforcement agencies. 19. The decree comes into force from the moment of its publication. Chairman of the Council of Ministers, Donetsk People's Republic, A. U. Borode, Minister of the Council of Ministers, B. A. Litvinov. Application number 2. With regard to settlements, controlled by the Donetsk People's Republic, as of 04.12.201473, as of December 4, 2014, 6 out of 18 districts of the Donetsk region, 12 out of 28 cities of regional subordination, 9 out of 24 cities and 52 out of 131 urban-type settlements are fully or partially under the control of the Donetsk People's Republic. In cities and districts of the Donetsk People's Republic, the process of formation of local authorities and administration, law enforcement and regulatory authorities, with the exception of judicial authorities, is currently underway, including areas 1. Amvrosivsky, completely under the control of the DPR. Regional Center, the city of Amvrosivka. Urban-type settlements, 3. Kutenikovo, Novo-Amvrosivsko, Voikovsky. 2. Novoazovsky, partially under the control of the DPR. The Regional Center, the city of Novoazovsk. Urban-type settlement, Sidovo. 3. Starobishevsky, completely under the control of the DPR. The Regional Center, the urban-type settlement of Starobishevo. City, Komsalskoy. Urban-type settlement, Novi Svet. 4. Telmanovsky, partially under the control of the DPR. The Regional Center, the urban-type settlement of Telmanovo. 5. Minor, completely under the control of the DPR. Regional Center, the city of regional subordination Shakhtersk. 6. Yasinovatsky, partially under the control of the DPR. Regional Center, the city of regional subordination Yasinovataya. Areas in which the DPR controls certain territories. 1. Timovsky. 2. Volnovarsky. Urban-type settlements. 2. Yelenovka, Novotroitsko. 3. Mariinsky. Regional Center, the city of Mariinka, partially. Urban-type settlements. 2. Alexandrovka, Staromikhailovka. Cities of regional subordination. 1. Donetsk. City districts. 9. Budanovsky, Voroshilovsky, Kalininsky, Kiev, Kirovsky, Kuibishevsky, Leninsky, Petrovsky. Proletarian. City, Mospino. Settlement, Gorbachevo-Mikhailovka. 2. Dokachevsk. 3. Golovka. City districts. 3. Kalininsky, Nikitovsky. Central city, village, Rumyantsevo. 4. Inakivo. City, Yuzhno-Kommunarsk. Settlements, 3. Friendly, Korsun, Karlo Marx. 5. Chtanovka. Village, Orkovka. 6. Kirovsko. 7. Makivka. City districts. 5. Central city, Minor, Kirovsky. Soviet, Chervonovodysky. Settlements, 17. Gruzko-Zoryansko, Gruzkolomovka, high, boundary, lighthouse, proletarian, coal miner, Guselski, Kolesnikovo, Sverdlovo, Yasinovka, dugouts, Krinichnaya, Nizhnyaya Krinka, Big Orakovo, Red October, forest. 8. Snowy, urban-type settlements. 4. Brazhino, Limanchik, Nikiforovo, Victory. 9. Thorez, urban-type settlements. 2. Pelagivka, loose. 10. Kartzisk, cities. 2. Zugaz, Ilovaisk, settlements. 8. Nikolivka, Zuevka, Troitsko-Kartzisk, Voikovo, Pokrovka, mine, wide, mining. 11. Shakhtersk, district center, urban-type settlements. 4. Kontano, Moscow, Angry, Stoskovsky. 12. Yasinovataya, district center. In all settlements, structures of authorities and administrations have been created and are functioning. The main sectors of the economy are coal, metallurgical, coke-chemical, chemical industries, heavy engineering, production of building materials, electric power industry, transport. The industrial sector in the controlled area is represented by the following objects. Ferrous metallurgy, for metallurgical plants. Makivka iron and steel works named after S. M. Kirov, Makivka. Makivka pipe foundry named after Kubyshev, Makivka. Yanakivo metallurgical plant, Yanakivo. Kartzisk pipe plant, Kartzisk. Coke and chemical industry, 5 coking plants, 1 chemical plant. Avdiivka coke plant, Avdiivka. Yasinovsky coke plant, Yasinovataya. Makivka coke plant, Makivka. Yanakivo coke and chemical industry, Yanakivo. Gorlovsky coke plant, Gorlovka. Concern Styrol, Gorlovka. Coal industry. Most of the enterprises of the Donetsk coal basin are located on the territory of the region. Coals of coking grades, ZH, K, OS, and power grades, T, A, are mined. Coal products are mined at the following associations and independent mines. Mine associations, 7. Artemugal, Gorlovka. Makivyagol, Makivka. Oktyabrogol, Kirovskoy. Ordzhonikivzyugal, Yenikievo. Snezhno anthracite, Snezhno. Thorez anthracite, Torez. Shakhtersk anthracite, Shakhtersk. Independent mines and mine management, 6 mines. Mine number 17-17 BIS. DTEK's Komsomolets Donbassa mine, Kirovskoy. Rasytnyanskaya mine, Torez. Mine named after Gavoy, Gorlovka. Mine named after Pochenkov, Makivka. Mine administration Kirovskoy, Kirovskoy. Coal cleaning enterprises, 16. CEP anthracite, Makivka. Komsomolskaya CEP, Dimitrov. Gorlovskaya CEP, Gorlovka. Donetsk CEP, Torez. Kalinin CEP, Gorlovka. Kiselevskaya CEP, Torez. Kolosnikovskaya CEP, Makivka. GOF Red Star, Torez. Postnikovskaya CEP, Shakhtersk. Proletarian TSOF, Makivka. Serdetenskaya CEP, Shakhtersk. Snezhnyanskaya CEP, Snezhnoy. Torez CEP, Kirovskoy. Ugolgorsk CEP, Yenikievo. Uzlovskaya CEP, Gorlovka. Miners CEP, Shakhtersk. Power generating facilities, 2 power plants. Starobishevskaya TPP, Settlement Novi Svet. Zuvskaya TPP, Zugaz. Mechanical engineering. Zuevsky Power Engineering Plant, Zugaz. Torez Electrotechnical Plant, Torez. Snezhnyansky Machine Building Plant, Branch Motorsich, Snezhnoy. Makivka Plant of Mine Automation, Makivka. Yasinovatsky Machine Building Plant, Yasinovataya. Railway transport. It is represented by a developed network of railway lines and enterprises of the state enterprise Donetsk Railway, as well as access railway lines of loading and transport departments of a number of coal mining enterprises. In addition, a significant number of smaller industrial enterprises of various industries operate on the territory of the DPR. Other minerals are being mined, marl, building and quartz sand, fluorites, phosphorites, ceramic clays. Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free e-library, http://royalib.com. Leave a review about the book. http://voyalib.com/Pinchuk_Andrey/voyne_gosbezopasnosti_dnr.html. All books by the author. http://royalib.com/author/Pinchuk_Andrey.html. Notes. 1. Vladimir Yurovich Antiyufeev, b. February 15, 1951, 1992 to 2012, Minister of State Security of the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic, July 10, 2014, September 6, 2014, First Deputy Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic. 2. Ravil Zakharevich Kalikov, born in 1969, June 7 to September 25, 2014, Prosecutor General of the Donetsk People's Republic. 3. Alexander Vladimirovich Zakharchenko, b. June 26, 1972, founder of the organization Oplet of Donbass, military commandant of Donetsk. Until August 7, 2014, Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of the Donetsk People's Republic. Since August 7, 2014, Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers of the DPR, since November 4, 2014, Head of the DPR. Awarded the Gold Star Hero of the Donetsk People's Republic. For Alexander Sergeyevich Khodakovsky, born in 1972 until March 2014, Commander of the Regional Donetsk Division of the SBU Alpha. Head of the Public Organization Patriotic Forces of Donbass, Commander of the Battalion, Brigade, Vostok of the Armed Forces of the DPR, November 2014 to February 2016, Secretary of the Security Council of the DPR. 5. Alexander Yurovich Borodai, b. July 25, 1972, May 16 to August 7, 2014, Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic, August 7 to October 20, 2014, First Deputy Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic, Russian public figure, publicist, political strategist. 6. Tokayu is a high-precision tactical missile system. The maximum firing range is 120 km. The launch mass of the rocket is 2010 kg. The striking part is 482 kg. 7. Igor Vvolodovich Gherkin, pseudonym Igor Ivanovich Strelkov, born in 1972, Minister of Defense of the DPR, May 16 to August 8, 2014. On April 13, 2014, he arrived in the city of Slavyansk, Donetsk region, where he declared himself the commander of the local militia. Russian citizen, military pensioner, previously served in the Russian Federal Security Service. Popular internet blogger. He is fond of staged reconstructions of historical events. Currently engaged in internal Russian opposition political activities. 8. See Appendix No. 1. 9. Oleg Vladimirovich Bereza, born in 1977, First Minister of Internal Affairs of the Donetsk People's Republic, the 17th of July 2014 to the 3rd of January 2015. Military pensioner of the Russian Federation. He was awarded the Gold Star of the Hero of the Donetsk People's Republic. 10. Decree of the Cabinet of Ministers of the DPR No. 17-5 dated the 17th of July 2014. On the creation of the Ministry of State Security, see Annex 11. On the night of May 25 to 26, 2014, armed supporters of the DPR attempted to seize the Donetsk airport. The purpose of the operation was to establish control over the control tower and the runway in order to stop the airlift of troops and military supplies. The operation, planned and led by Vostok Battalion Commander Alexander Khodakovsky, involved a consolidated detachment of Russian and Ukrainian volunteers transferred to his command, which arrived in Donetsk from the Rostov region on May 25. During the unsuccessful assault, further uncoordinated actions during the retreat, a large number of militias were killed and wounded. 12. Igor Nikolaevich Bezler, call sign Biz, born December 30, 1965, Simferopol, one of the leaders of the militia. From spring to November 2014, commander of the Donbass People's Militia in Gorlovka. Arrived in Slavyansk as part of the Strelkov detachment as one of its commanders. After a conflict with Strelkov, he moved to Gorlovka, where he had previously lived, organized the capture of the city under the control of the militia and led it. Later Gorlovka and its suburbs were besieged by Ukrainian forces. 13. Zu-23-2, Soviet 23mm twin anti-aircraft gun, consisting of 2 anti-aircraft guns, a machine tool, sight. 14. Armed Forces of Ukraine. 15. Press Conference of V. Putin on March 4, 2014. 16. Ukrainian cyborgs. This is how Ukrainian propaganda called its soldiers participating in the battles for the Donetsk airport. In turn, Donetsk residents noticed that the anonym of the word cyborg is the word coffin, which more accurately reflects the essence of the process. 17. Sergei Nikolaevich Dubinsky, call sign Petrovsky, Kamuri, bad soldier, bison, born in 1962. Graduated from Far Eastern Higher School of Higher Education, military pensioner, colonel of the reserve of the Russian Federation. Previously, He served in the armed forces of the USSR, deputy commander of the reconnaissance company 181 SMEs, 108 MSDs, the Russian Federation, where he met Igor Gherkin, Strelkov, as deputy commandant of one of the military commandant's offices in the Chechen Republic. In the DPR, Strelkov was appointed his deputy for intelligence, major general of the armed forces of the DPR, the creator of the GRU DPR, 18 private military companies, 19 personal protection, 20 mountain windproof suit, is a well-known and extremely common Russian camouflage. 21 Arsen Sergeyevich Pavlov, also known as Motorola, B. February 2, 1983, Ukta, commander of the Special Unit Sparta of the Donetsk People's Republic, awarded the Gold Star Hero of the Donetsk People's Republic. 22 The presence of a large number of conflicting norms. The uncertainty in connection with this possible choice of a course of action can lead to a phenomenon called anomie by E. Durkheim, a state of absence of norms. Anomie is a social condition characterized by the decomposition of the system of values, caused by the crisis of the whole society, its social institutions, the contradiction between the proclaimed goals and the impossibility of their realization for the majority. 23. The 24th Separate Assault Battalion Ada is a unit of the ground forces of Ukraine, previously a volunteer unit of the Lugansk region, which became widely known in connection with war crimes committed in the Luhansk region as part of the ATO units. 24 Alexei Alexandrovich Dykye, since October 2013, Deputy Head of the Main Directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Head of the Criminal Police of the Donetsk region, Police Colonel. Then, Under Minister Oleg Vladimirovich Beryza, the first Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the DPR. Currently, he is the Minister of the Interior of the DPR, Major General of the Police. By decree of the head of the DPR No. 65 dated February 21, 2015, he was awarded the title Hero of the Donetsk People's Republic for participation in the battles near Debaltseve. 25 Yasinovataya is a city of the Donetsk People's Republic, included in the Donetsk agglomeration. It has a large railway junction. 26 The 9mm Stechkin automatic pistol, APS, is an automatic pistol developed in the late 1940s and early 1950s by designer I.Y.A. Stechkin. Magazine capacity 20 rounds. Attached wooden holster butt. 27 Mariupol is a city in the Donetsk region in southeastern Ukraine, on the shores of the Sea of Azov at the mouth of the Kalmius and Kalchik rivers. The population of the city as of January 1, 2015 is 476,827 people. It is of strategic importance for Ukraine. The city has an international seaport and a number of large industrial enterprises. Geographically connects the Donetsk People's Republic with the Crimea. 28 Special Purpose Unit, Azov, Ukrainian, Drozdil of Special Purpose, Azov, is a linear special purpose unit within Military Unit No. 3057 of the Eastern Operational Territorial Association of the National Guard of Ukraine. Formed from nationalist volunteers in May 2014 in Mariupol as a battalion of the Special Police Patrol Service of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. In September 2014, the unit was deployed to the regiment. In November 2014, transferred to the National Guard of Ukraine. The unit has National Fascist symbols and the corresponding ideology. 29 Igor Evgenievich Kakimzyanov, B. July 25, 1980, First Minister of Defense of the Donetsk People's Republic from April 10 to May 7, 2014. May 7, 2014 arrested by the Ukrainian authorities in Mariupol, September 15, 2014, released on exchange. 30 Eduard Bajarin, Deputy Commander of the People's Militia Corps of the DPR, before appointment, Deputy Commander of the Kalmius Battalion. He is the actual official media representative of the armed forces of the DPR. 31 Vladimir Petrovich Kononov, born in 1974, Third Minister of Defense of the DPR, August 15, 2014, present, Lieutenant General of the Armed Forces of the DPR. Awarded the Gold Star Hero of the Donetsk People's Republic. 32 A small city that is part of the DPR, on the border with the LPR and Russia. 33 http://www.russiapost.su/archives/37405. 34 https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=IBGQ9SHFC-do. 35 Eugene 1 Jin, 1823–1831, by A. S. Pushkin, 1799–1837, Chapter 2, Line 14. 36 http://www.kub.iu/Ponomarenko. Viktor Viktorovich Ponomarenko is a Russian scientist who has been engaged in research in the field of practical characterology for more than 20 years. A psychiatrist, in the recent past a closed specialist of one of the law enforcement agencies of the Russian Federation. Member of Special Operations in Hotspots, retired colonel, psychologist expert of the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation and the MUR in the investigation of crimes that had a great public outcry, illegal actions against D. Kolodov.V. Listiev, serial crimes in the Losiny Ostrov Forest Park, terrorist attacks in the Moscow metro, the terrorist attack on Dubrovka, etc. Lecturer at the Institute of Business and Business Administration of the Academy of National Economy under the government of the Russian Federation. Academy of Public Administration under the President of the Russian Federation. Author of the book Practical Characterology with elements of predicting and managing the behavior of the 7 radicals. 37 I. Gherkin. Detective of Haldiborn Castle. 38 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-IV. 4th edition, https://en.wikipedia.org wiki, __site_note, DSM, 5-2. 39 Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. 40 Sergei Anatolievich Strylyuk, call sign Abwa, June 23, 1972, Vinnytsia region, Ukrainian SSR, an active military leader of the Donetsk People's Republic. Arrived in Slavyansk as part of the Strelkov Group. After graduating from a military school, he served in the counterintelligence of the SBU and the tax police. Gained fame in the spring of 2014 during the protests in the southeast of Ukraine, as the head of counterintelligence of the Donetsk People's Republic. Since May 12, 2014, Deputy Commander of the Armed Forces of the Donetsk People's Republic. 41 Andrei Evgenovich Pergin, born January 26, 1972, Donetsk, Donetsk socio-political figure, chairman of the People's Council of the DPR from November 14, 2014 to September 4, 2015. Before that first deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Republic from May 16, 2014, founder of the Donetsk Republic movement. 42 https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=bghqce2r4. 43 Leonid Eduardovich Slutsky, born January 4, 1968, is a Russian politician. Deputy of the State Duma of the 3rd, 1999 to 2003, 4th, 2003 to 2007, 5th, 2007 to 2011, and 6th convocations, since 2011, member of the LDPR faction. 44 Kapanka is an enterprise for illegal mining of coal in a quarry or underground. They are common in areas where industrial coal mining has ceased, but coal reserves have been preserved in relative proximity to the surface, outcrops of closed or mothballed mines. 45 Renat Leonidovich Akhmetov, born in 1966 in Donetsk. Considered the richest man in Ukraine. For a long time he bore the unofficial title of Master of Donbass. President of the Shakhtar Football Club, founder of the System Capital Management Company, deputy of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine from the Party of Regions, founder of the Effective Governance Foundation and the Development of Ukraine Charitable Foundation. Before the events of 2014, the Donetsk region with a residence in Donetsk was considered the main fiefdom. The owner of most of the most profitable enterprises in the region. 46 http://faki.ua/198962-roda-utargnila-zedakan-o-dkom municiacii. 47 more on this in the third part. 48 Red herring, English literally, red herring, in the jargon of the American intelligence agencies is a disinformation operation, a diversionary maneuver, which, due to its brightness and publicity, distracts from other processes. Another function of the operation may be to discredit the idea under which it is publicly declared. 49 http://crime.in.ua/stati/20140725/na/sledstvenenost. 50 Alexander Glebovich Nevzorov, Soviet and Russian journalist, reporter, TV presenter, publicist, director, screenwriter, and producer of documentaries. Politician, deputy of the State Duma of 4 convocations, 1993 to 2007. Advisor to the General Director of Channel 1, since May 2016. 51 Konstantin Valerievich Malafeev, born in 1974, Russian businessman who received the unofficial title of Orthodox oligarch. Head of the Marshall Capital Investment Company, chairman of the board of directors of the Zagrad Group and owner of the TV channel of the same name. Founder of the St. Basil the Great Foundation, member of the Patriarchal Commission on Family Affairs and Motherhood Protection, member of the Board of Trustees of the Safe Internet League non-profit partnership. 52. Rodnyansky hired ex-head of the DPR, Borodai to fight. Kolomoisky, http://abouncerevitel.com/politics/74230 IJ nanimal expremoradiya na Borodaya dl Borbayes Kolomoiskim. HTM. 53. Police, from Lat. Militia, Army, in Russia during the Russian-Prussian War of 1806 to 1807. Militia, disbanded after the Peace of Tilsit. At the end of 19, beginning of 20 centuries. In the Kuban and in Dagestan, irregular troops. 54. Samohyla is a burial mound in the Shakhtarsky district of the Donetsk region, one of the heights of the Donetsk Ridge, 277.9 m. At the top of the mound there was a Cossack guard post, fortifications of the Mayas front. After the Great Patriotic War, a memorial complex was created on Samohyla. The mound is part of the regional landscape park Donetsk Kryas. During the fighting in August 2014, the memorial complex was destroyed by constant shelling. Became the site of fierce fighting between the militia of Donbass and the armed forces of Ukraine. 55. Yevgeny Eduardovich Mikhailov, born in 1963, governor of the Pskov region of the Russian Federation from 1996 to 2004. On July 29, 2014, he was appointed to the post of Minister of the Council of Ministers, Managing Director of the Council of Ministers of the Donetsk People's Republic. Worked at the post until November 2014. 56. The course of a young fighter. The initial period of military service for cadets of military universities. 57. Words from the song Officers, Bio, Gazmanov. 58. Separate districts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. A term from the Minsk Agreements. 59. March 18, 2014 on the territory of the Photogrammetric Center of the Directorate of the Central Military Topographic Navigation Main Directorate for Operational Support of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Military Unit A, 3674, Republic of Crimea, Simferopol, Pobeda Avenue 213, during the taking of the unit under control by the Self-Defense Forces of the Ministry Defense of Crimea. 2 people were killed and 2 people were injured. 1 killed and 1 wounded from the side of the military unit and 1 killed and 1 wounded from the self-defense forces. 60 Accra. Translation. Dear colleagues, thanks for the sympathy. We understand how hard it is for you there when all the rules of the work of the special services are neglected. People, from the street, are appointed to positions, and everything that has been accumulated over many years of service goes awry. We sincerely sympathize with you. The people are the same everywhere, in Transcarpathia, in the Crimea, and we swore an oath to protect them, no matter what the cost. And the people of Crimea want one thing: peace, tranquility, harmony and respect for their legal rights to language, culture and security. We remain true to our oath. Crimea is our home. Here they don't shoot, don't torture people, don't shame them for their own views, and no one considers representatives of law enforcement agencies to be traitors. For the first time in many years, they are warmly supported by the people. Unfortunately, there is nothing similar in other regions of Ukraine. Dear colleagues, we wish you endurance and courage, because for many honest officers of the SBU, severe trials for honor and dignity are yet to come. 61 Operational and Technical Department. 62 Garrote, Spanish garrote, dar garrote, twisting, tightening, execute, a tool for strangling a person. There are 2 main uses, an instrument of execution and torture, and a type of bladed weapon. It is usually made of a strong cord 30 to 60 centimeters long with handles attached to its ends. 63 http://uapress.info/ru/news/show/77432. 64 Vladislav Yurovich Surkov, Assistant to the President of the Russian Federation. 65 If we do not hold the city, we will all perish. This is quite understandable. I promised, and my people promised that we would not leave Slavyansk. Said Strelko // I moy ludio beskali, chto. 66 Chernomorskoy, Ukrainian, Kornomorsk, until 1945, Chabanka. Until 1988, Guards, an urban-type settlement in the Kominternovsky district of the Odessa region of Ukraine. 67 Sabotage and Reconnaissance Group. According to Soviet terminology, it was customary for the DRG to designate the enemy, and the RDG, Reconnaissance and Sabotage Group, for its forces. 68 Pesky is a settlement in the Yasinovatsky district of the DPR, adjacent to the Donetsk airport. From this village, Ukrainian artillery regularly fired at civilian objects of the DPR, and primarily the city of Donetsk. 69 Fighting in the area of Debaltsevo Cauldron. Debaltsevo Arc. Intense large-scale hostilities in January-February 2015 in the area of the city of Debaltsevo after the actual termination of the truce. The fighting in the Debaltsevo area continued after the Second Minsk Agreement was signed on February 12, as the leaders of the People's Republics declared that this territory is the inland region of the DPR and therefore the agreement does not apply to it. The fighting ended with the retreat of the Ukrainian troops. The cities of Debaltsev, Uglegorsk and the surrounding area came under the control of the DPR. 70 NSV Utes, Index GRAU, 6P11, Soviet 12.7mm heavy machine gun, designed to deal with lightly armored targets and firepower, to destroy enemy manpower and destroy air targets. 71 Military slang. Cargo 100, ammunition. 200th, dead, 300th, wounded, 400th, shell-shocked. Sometimes they single out 500ths, drunkards, deserters, cowards. 72, Donetsk shelling of the city, Kuyabishevsky district 0302-2015, // https://www.youtube.com/watch?v=JY66QBMQY6C. 73 Before the Debaltsevo offensive.